How does Irshad escapes from the small town after the airstrikes of the NATO planes? After the NATO airstrikes on the small town where Irshad was hiding, her escape is depicted as a tense and dangerous process, shaped by chaos, destruction, and her own resourcefulness. Here's how Irshad escapes from the small town after the airstrikes. 1. Witnessing the airstrikes and chaos. Irshad is hiding outside the town, having followed her friend Nadia and the other wives of the terrorist leader Mohammed Noor to the hotel where they are meeting him. Around 4 a.m., the quiet night is shattered by massive airstrikes. The town is bombed heavily, with huge flames and explosions lighting up the sky. The bombardment is so intense that Irshad doubts anyone could have survived inside the town. 2. Waiting for the right moment. After the airstrikes, Irshad waits until sunrise. She sees helicopters flying over the town and commandos parachuting down, landing near her hiding place. She witnesses fierce gun battles as the commandos engage in street fighting with the Mujahideen. 3. Entering the town. Once the fighting subsides and the commandos have entered the town, Irshad decides to approach. She pays her taxi driver double to take her as close as possible, but he refuses to go further due to the danger, so she continues on foot, alone and unarmed. As she enters the devastated town, she sees bodies of dead or wounded Mujahideen scattered everywhere and commandos filling the streets, ready to shoot anyone who resists. 4. Revealing her identity and seeking help. To avoid being mistaken for a local or a threat, Irshad reveals her white face and blonde hair to the commandos, showing she is an Australian woman, not a Pakistani or Afghan. She speaks to the commandos in English and explains who she is and why she is there. The commandos assure her they will not shoot anyone unless they resist, but they do not have information about her friend Nadia. 5. Searching for Nadia and leaving the town. Irshad tries to enter the hotel where Nadia was last seen, but it is closed off by the U.S. Marines, and she is told that all detainees have been taken away. She searches the town for Nadia, but finds no trace of her among the dead or living. Eventually, the Pakistani police take control of the town after the NATO forces withdraw, and Irshad is forced to leave, still uncertain about Nadia's fate. 6. Aftermath. Irshad returns to the city where she is staying and contacts her American friend at Guantanamo Bay to find out what happened to Nadia and Mohammed Noor. She later learns through media and contacts that Nadia survived, while Mohammed Noor was captured and sent to a U.S. prison. Key points. Irshad's escape is possible because the airstrikes and commando raid create chaos, breaking down the control of the Mujahideen and local authorities. She uses her appearance and language skills to avoid being mistaken for a local or a threat. Despite the devastation, she manages to leave the town safely, though emotionally shaken and uncertain about her friend's fate until later. Why Irshad makes a sham marriage with a man while she is escaping. Irshad makes a sham, fake, marriage with a man while escaping for practical survival and protection reasons in the dangerous environment of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Here's why Irshad makes a sham, fake, marriage based on the novel's content. 1. Protection from sexual harassment and danger. In the regions Irshad is traveling through, especially the Swat Valley and border areas, women are not allowed to travel alone. A woman seen without a male guardian, mahram, is at high risk of being harassed, assaulted, or even arrested by local authorities or militants. The novel explicitly states that in these societies, a woman traveling alone is seen as fresh, uncovered meat and is vulnerable to being raped or attacked by men, including police officers, militants, or even ordinary civilians. Wearing Islamic dress, abaya and niqab, helps her blend in, but it is not enough to guarantee safety. 2. Legal and social requirements. Islamic law and local customs require that a woman be accompanied by a husband or a close male relative when traveling. If she is stopped at a checkpoint or questioned by authorities, she must be able to prove she is not alone or improperly accompanied. To avoid suspicion and to pass through checkpoints safely, Irshad arranges a sham marriage with a local man. She pays him to pose as her husband, and they even obtain a fake halal marriage contract from a local imam. This allows her to claim she is traveling with her husband, which is accepted by authorities and reduces the risk of being detained or attacked. 3. Avoiding arrest or flogging. The novel describes that in these areas, women caught traveling alone can be flogged, arrested, or worse. By having a man pose as her husband, Irshad avoids these punishments and can move more freely, even though she is still at risk. 4. No romantic or sexual relationship. The marriage is purely on paper and for appearances. Irshad does not treat the man as a real husband or have any romantic or sexual relationship with him. She is clear that this arrangement is only for her safety and to facilitate her escape. 5. Precedent in her life. Irshad's experience with forced and sham marriages, such as the Muhalil marriage in Saudi Arabia, makes her wary, but she recognizes that this is a necessary evil to survive and protect herself and the children she is helping. In summary, Irshad makes a sham marriage with a man during her escape because, in the context of strict Islamic law and dangerous social norms, it is the only way for a woman to travel safely and avoid harassment, arrest, or violence. The marriage is a protective disguise, not a real relationship, and is a survival strategy in an environment where women's autonomy is severely restricted. Irshad's sham marriage during her escape reminds her of her earlier forced marriage to the Muhalil in Saudi Arabia because both are marriages of necessity, not choice or love. And both are humiliating experiences imposed by patriarchal and religious systems to solve a legal or social problem. Here's a detailed explanation with direct references from the novel. 1. Both marriages are for survival, not love. In both cases, Irshad is not seeking a real relationship. The marriage is a means to an end. In Saudi Arabia, it is to become halal again for her ex-husband after a triple divorce. During her escape, it is to protect herself from harassment and legal danger while traveling as a woman alone. 2. Both are arranged under duress. The Muhalil marriage is forced on her by her ex-husband and his uncle, who insist that she must marry and sleep with another man before she can remarry her ex-husband, as required by the Islamic law. She is threatened with losing her children if she refuses. The sham marriage during her escape is also not her choice. It is a desperate measure to avoid arrest, flogging, or worse, in a society where women cannot travel alone. She pays a man to pose as her husband, and the marriage is only on paper. 3. Both involve deep humiliation and trauma. The Muhalil marriage is described as the most humiliating and abusive experience of her life, culminating in rape by a stranger, with her ex-husband complicit. She feels like a prostitute, used and discarded for the sake of religious technicality. The sham marriage during her escape, while not physically abusive, brings back memories of this humiliation. She is reminded of how she was forced to marry and submit to a man she did not choose, simply to satisfy the demands of a system that does not value her autonomy or dignity. 4. Direct reference from the novel. Here is a direct quote from the novel describing Irshad's feelings about the sham marriage during her escape. Her fake marriage with him reminded her about the Muhalil husband whom she was forced by her ex-husband Mustafa to marry to legalize her pussy. Until this day, the Australian woman could not erase from her memory the horrific rape she was subjected to by the ugly Muhalil man in her room in front of her Saudi husband. In summary, Irshad's sham marriage during her escape is a painful reminder of her earlier Muhalil marriage because both are examples of how she is forced to surrender her agency and dignity to survive in oppressive systems. Both marriages are not about partnership or love, but about navigating and surviving patriarchal and religious rules that treat women as property or legal problems to be solved, rather than as human beings with rights and feelings. Irshad's experience with sham marriages, both in Saudi Arabia with the Muhalil and later during her escape from the small town after the NATO airstrikes, are deeply connected in the novel, both emotionally and thematically. Why does the sham marriage remind Irshad of the Muhalil? 1. Both are marriages of necessity, not love or choice. In Saudi Arabia, After being divorced 3 times by her husband Mustafa, Ershad is forced by Islamic law to marry a muhalil, a man whose sole purpose is to legalize her for her ex-husband by consummating a marriage and then divorcing her. This is humiliating, traumatic, and entirely transactional. She is treated as an object to be passed between men for religious technicalities. Later, when Ershad is escaping from the small town after the airstrikes, she again enters a sham marriage. This time, it is a practical arrangement with a local man to help her and the children escape safely. The marriage is not for love or companionship, but for survival and to navigate the dangers and restrictions placed on women traveling alone in that society. 2. Both marriages strip her of agency and dignity. In both cases, Ershad is compelled to submit to the will of men and the demands of a patriarchal system. The sham marriage during her escape reminds her of the earlier trauma because, once again, she must marry for reasons beyond her control, and her body and identity are used as bargaining chips for her safety and her children's future. What happens to Ershad in both marriages? 1. With the muhalil in Saudi Arabia. Ershad is forced to marry a Somali man, the muhalil, so she can remarry her ex-husband. The marriage is arranged by her ex-husband and his uncle, and she is not allowed to sign the marriage contract herself. The muhalil refuses to divorce her unless she sleeps with him, as required by religious law. Ershad is coerced into sex, which is described as a brutal rape, while her ex-husband waits outside. She is left deeply traumatized, humiliated, and emotionally scarred by the experience. Direct quote from the novel. Never has the Australian woman felt more humiliated and abused throughout her life than when the ugly Somali man brutally raped her in her bedroom with full knowledge of her Saudi ex-husband. Meanwhile, Mustafa sits outside his bedroom as if he were the bodyguard of his ex-wife's rapist or the pimp who brought a man to fuck his wife in his bed. 2. With a sham husband during her escape. Ershad arranges a fake marriage with a local man to facilitate her escape from the Taliban stronghold and to protect herself and the children. The marriage is purely for appearances and legal protection. She does not treat the man as a real husband or have any intention of a true marital relationship. This arrangement is necessary because, in the local context, a woman cannot travel or move freely without a male guardian or husband. The sham marriage allows her to pass through checkpoints and avoid suspicion or violence. Direct quote from the novel. She paid an unemployed Pakistani man and bribed him into pretending to be her husband. The man became incredibly happy when he saw the huge amount of money that the white woman had given him. Therefore, he agreed to make a fake halal marriage contract with her with the help of an imam from a nearby mosque. Although she married him in paper, Ershad never treated him as her lawful husband or thought of having sex with him. Her fake marriage with him reminded her about the muhalil husband whom she was forced by her ex-husband Mustafa to marry to legalize her pussy. Until this day, the Australian woman could not erase from her memory the horrific rape she was subjected to by the ugly muhalil man in her room in front of her Saudi husband. Summary table. Marriage context. Purpose/reason. Ershad's experience. Emotional impact. Muhalil in Saudi Arabia. Religious technicality. Forced, raped, deeply traumatized. Humiliation, loss of agency. Sham marriage, escape. Survival, legal cover. Transactional, no intimacy, reminds her of past trauma. Resentment, survival instinct. In both marriages, Ershad is forced to submit to systems that modify her body and autonomy. The sham marriage during her escape is a painful reminder of the earlier muhalil episode, reinforcing her sense of being trapped by patriarchal and religious structures, and highlighting the recurring theme of survival at the cost of personal dignity. Why does Ershad ask the question, are we heroes or betrayers? Ershad asks this question after she helps the CIA locate and capture the notorious terrorist leader Mohammed Noor al-Fransawi, her friend Nadia's husband. She is torn between two conflicting feelings. Heroism. She knows she has helped prevent further terrorist attacks and saved innocent lives by enabling the capture of a dangerous criminal. Betrayal. At the same time, she feels she has betrayed her friend Nadia by putting her at risk during the raid, and she is haunted by the collateral damage, the innocent people killed or harmed during the airstrikes and commando raid. This moral ambiguity, doing the right thing at great personal and emotional cost, leads her to question whether her actions make her a hero or a betrayer. The novel explores this theme of moral complexity, especially for women trapped in systems of violence and oppression, forced to make impossible choices. Direct quote from the novel. Are we heroes or traitors? As soon as she reached the place where she was staying, the angry Australian widow Ershad called her American boyfriend in the Guantanamo Bay detention center and complained about the way the NATO forces dealt with the capture of the Frenchman, who was the most wanted foreign mujahid terrorist leader of the Taliban and al-Qaeda groups. At this moment, the mother, Ershad, remembered her wrong advice to her Canadian friend, Shahinaz, which led to the stoning of her daughter, Scheherazade, and the suicide of her other daughter, Shadia. Many years later, she could not forget and forgive herself for the brutal murder of that innocent, beautiful teenage girl, and the whipping of her handsome Syrian boyfriend on his bare back 100 lashes until he became a wheelchair-bound, disabled person. Therefore, if her friend Nadia was killed in those airstrikes, Ershad's memory would be haunted again by the blood of another innocent foreign friend of hers. She is left to wrestle with the question, are we heroes or betrayers? Because every act of resistance or cooperation with authorities in such a violent, complex world comes with a heavy price, sometimes paid by the innocent. Why the CIA refuses Ershad to stay more than 1 week after she returns from Pakistan with Nadia's 2 sons. The CIA refuses to let Ershad stay in the United States for more than 1 week after she returns from Pakistan with Nadia's 2 sons because of her background, her association with terrorism, and the suspicion surrounding her identity and past activities. Here's how the novel describes this episode. After Ershad helps the CIA capture the notorious terrorist Mohammed Noor al-Fransawi and brings Nadia's 2 sons to the U.S., she is given a 6-month visa and expects to be welcomed as a hero. However, upon arrival at New York International Airport, she is told by officials that she is booked into a 5-star hotel for a week, all expenses paid, but she is expected to leave the USA in just 1 week. Under no circumstances can she extend her stay for more than 7 days. They also handed to the Australian woman Ershad Al-Shamari a check for $50 million at the same international airport when she landed with the 2 children. About the 2 sons of her American friend Nadia Noor, they promised to transfer them to their mother, who at that time lived with her parents in the city of Chicago. Ershad is disappointed and confused by this restriction. The Australian widow Ershad was disappointed by the restrictions the U.S. government placed on her residency. She has a 6-month visa issued to her in Islamabad by the U.S. Embassy. Why don't they want her to stay more than 7 days? She expected to be greeted with wreaths and honors. She thought there would be media coverage of her arrival at New York International Airport, but then she found out that they did not even want her to stay more than a week on American soil. They refused to let her take her American friend's 2 children to their mother. Why don't they want her to meet her friend and spend 6 months in the U.S.? The reasons for this restriction are suspicion and security concerns, Ershad's long association with terrorist groups, her marriage to a 9/11 hijacker, and her time spent in Taliban and al-Qaeda camps make her a person of interest and suspicion to U.S. authorities. Legal and immigration issues. She entered Canada under a false identity, and her background is considered too controversial and risky for a longer stay. Political sensitivity. The U.S. government wants to avoid any controversy or risk associated with her presence, especially given her notoriety and the potential for negative media attention. In summary, the CIA and U.S. government allow Ershad to enter the country only briefly, provide her with a reward for her cooperation, but insist she leave within a week due to her controversial background and the security risks she represents. Ershad's response to the CIA's restriction. allowing her to stay in the United States for only 1 week after returning from Pakistan with Nadia's 2 sons, is a mix of disappointment, confusion, and, ultimately, defiance. Here's how the novel describes her reaction. 1. Disappointment and confusion. Irshad is initially shocked and hurt by the restriction. She expected to be welcomed as a hero for her role in helping the CIA capture a notorious terrorist and for rescuing Nadia's children. Instead, she is told she must leave the US within a week, despite having a 6-month visa. The Australian widow Irshad was disappointed by the restrictions the US government placed on her residency. She has a 6-month visa issued to her in Islamabad by the US Embassy. Why don't they want her to stay more than 7 days? She expected to be greeted with wreaths and honors. She thought there would be media coverage of her arrival at New York International Airport, but then she found out that they did not even want her to stay more than a week on American soil. They refused to let her take her American friend's 2 children to their mother. Why don't they want her to meet her friend and spend 6 months in the US? 2. Frustration and a sense of injustice. Irshad feels that the CIA and US government are treating her as a liability or a potential threat, rather than as someone who risked her life to help them. She is frustrated that, despite her cooperation and the dangers she faced, she is still viewed with suspicion because of her background and associations. 3. Defiance and taking action. Rather than quietly accepting the restriction, Irshad decides to fight back. She goes to the media and exposes the way she and Nadia have been treated by the CIA, despite their crucial help in capturing a terrorist. She decided to never leave the United States until her name and that of her American friend were separated from the stigma of being the wives of notorious terrorists. Until the government of the United States of America apologized to her for imprisoning her for 4 years in Guantanamo Bay Detention Center among those Islamic terrorists, and she never committed a crime. Until her children are returned to her, she will not go anywhere without them. To achieve these goals, the angry Australian woman decided to go to the media and expose such cover-up abuses. She wants everyone to know how she and her American friend risked their lives to help the CIA capture the dangerous terrorist Mullah Sheikh Mohammed Noor al-Fransawi. She also wants the world to know that some senior CIA agents did not keep their promise to receive Nadia Noor and her with honor. Instead of giving them credibility, the CIA agents attributed it to 2 cowardly Western women who refused to be named for fear of terrorists. Moreover, she would like the Americans to know that rather than allowing her to stay 6 months in their country, the CIA agents wanted her to return to her native Australia as soon as possible. As if her extended stay of more than a week on American soil might lead to something more terrible than the cowardly terrorist attacks of September 11th. 4. Outcome. Irshad's public exposure of her treatment leads to media attention, official apologies from the US and Canadian governments, and eventually, the restoration of her refugee status and the right to claim custody of her children in Canada. In summary, Irshad responds to the CIA's restriction with disappointment, anger, and ultimately, activism, using her voice and story to demand justice and recognition for her sacrifices and to fight for her rights and those of her children. Here's a detailed summary of how Irshad tries to change the CIA's decision about her stay in the United States after returning from Pakistan with Nadia's 2 sons, based on the novel. 1. Initial restriction by the CIA. When Irshad arrives in New York with Nadia's 2 sons, she is welcomed by officials, given a week's stay in a 5-star hotel, and handed a $50 million reward for her role in capturing the terrorist Mohammed Noor. However, she is told she must leave the USA within 1 week, despite having a 6-month visa. She is not allowed to extend her stay and is not permitted to deliver the children to their mother herself. This restriction is imposed by the CIA, who want her out of the country quickly and quietly. 2. Irshad's response to the restriction. Irshad is deeply disappointed and frustrated by this treatment. She expected to be honored and recognized for her help, not pushed out of the country. She feels the CIA is trying to keep her and Nadia's story quiet and is angry that she is being treated as a wife of a terrorist rather than as a hero. 3. Steps Irshad takes to challenge the decision. A. Attempts to contact the media. Irshad decides to go public with her story. She tries to contact major newspapers like the New York Times and TV channels, CNN, Fox News, but initially gets only answering machines or no response. B. Filing a complaint with the police. She then goes to the nearest police station and files a complaint against the CIA agents for not keeping their promise to honor her and Nadia. The police are skeptical at first, but she shows them a copy of the $50 million check she received from the U.S. government as a reward for her role in capturing Mohammed Noor. This convinces the police to take her complaint seriously. C. Media attention and public pressure. The story leaks to the media and quickly becomes breaking news. Irshad is interviewed by journalists, human rights activists, and women's rights advocates. Her story is broadcast widely, and she is praised for her courage and for helping the U.S. Marines and NATO forces capture a dangerous terrorist. D. Official apologies and policy change. The media pressure and public outcry force the U.S. and Canadian governments to respond. Irshad receives official apologies from both governments. The Canadian government agrees to restore her refugee status, pay her compensation, and allow her to claim custody of her 6 children. The U.S. government acknowledges her contribution, though it maintains its policy of not revealing the names of informants for safety reasons. Summary table. Steps taken by Irshad. Step. Action. Outcome. 1. Tries to contact media. No initial response. 2. Files complaint with police. Police take her seriously after seeing the $50 million check. 3. Story leaks to media. Becomes breaking news, public support grows. 4. Media pressure mounts. Governments issue apologies, restore her rights, and allow her to stay/resettle. Direct quote from the novel. She decides to head to the nearest police station and file a complaint against these CIA agents who have disappointed her and her American friend Nadia. She showed the police a copy of the $50 million check she had received from the U.S. government as a reward for revealing the hiding place of the dangerous foreign terrorist Mullah Sheikh Mohammed Noor al-Fransawi. Consequently, the U.S. police found it difficult to dismiss her complaint. Once Irshad filed her complaint, the matter was leaked to the media. All the newspapers, magazines, and TV channels reported her grievance on their front pages, and it became breaking news on every television channel in America. Shortly thereafter, the Australian woman received official apologies from the U.S. and Canadian governments. Her refugee status was restored, and she was resettled as a persecuted refugee Muslima woman in Canada. The CIA justifies its refusal to allow Irshad to stay for more than 1 week in the United States and her previous arrest and imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo, with several reasons, as described in the novel. 1. Justification for limiting Irshad's stay in the USA. Security and reputation concerns. The CIA is concerned about Irshad's background and her association with terrorism, given that she was married to Mustafa, one of the 9/11 hijackers, and spent years in Taliban and al-Qaeda camps. Even though she helped capture a terrorist and was given a reward, the CIA does not want her to remain in the U.S., fearing public backlash, media scrutiny, and potential security risks. They want her out of the country quickly and quietly to avoid any controversy or complications. Policy on informants. The CIA maintains a policy of not revealing or publicizing the names of informants or those who cooperate with them, even if those individuals wish to be recognized. This is partly for the safety of the informant and partly to avoid drawing attention to sensitive operations. Irshad's case is treated as a matter to be handled discreetly, not as a public celebration. Visa and legal status. Although Irshad has a 6-month visa, the CIA overrides this by imposing a 1-week limit, using their authority to restrict her stay for national security reasons. She is told she must leave after 1 week and is not allowed to deliver Nadia's children to their mother herself. 2. Justification for her arrest and imprisonment in Gitmo. Association with terrorism. Irshad was arrested and sent to Guantanamo Bay because of her long association with known terrorists. She was married to Mustafa, a 9/11 hijacker, and lived for years among Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. The CIA and FBI suspected she might have had knowledge of terrorist activities or provided material support, even if only by association. Immigration fraud. Irshad entered Canada under a false identity, claiming to be an American citizen named Iman Atta. When her real identity was uncovered, this raised further suspicions and legal complications. Precautionary detention. The CIA and U.S. authorities detained her as a high-risk individual, even though they could not prove she was directly involved in terrorist acts. She was held in Gitmo for 4 years without trial, as the authorities investigated her background and connections. Eventually, she was released when no evidence of direct involvement was found, but her case remained controversial. Official statement from the novel. The CIA said she was arrested in Canada due to her immigrating to the country under a fake name Iman Atta and falsely claiming to be an American citizen when she was not. Moreover, her association with terrorists for many years made her vulnerable to arrest and detention for legal accountability. Therefore, the CIA believed that the Australian Muslim woman, Irshad Al-Shamari, did not deserve honor or an apology at that time. After the ordeal with the CIA and her forced departure from the United States, the Canadian government compensates Irshad in several significant ways, as described in the novel. 1. Official apology and restoration of status. The Canadian government issues an official apology to Irshad for handing her over to the CIA and for the hardships she endured as a result of her wrongful detention and the loss of her children. Her refugee status is restored, and she is resettled in Canada as a persecuted refugee woman. 2. Financial compensation. The Canadian government agrees to pay Irshad $10 million in compensation. This is in recognition of the suffering, wrongful detention, and the deprivation of her rights and family that she experienced due to the actions of Canadian authorities. 3. Custody and family reunification. The government allows Irshad to claim custody of her 6 children as quickly and easily as possible. Her legal rights as a mother are restored, and she is able to reunite with her children who had been adopted by Christian families during her detention. 4. Public recognition and support. Irshad's case becomes widely known in the media, and she receives public support and recognition for her courage and for helping in the capture of a dangerous terrorist. This public attention also helps pressure the government to act in her favor. In summary, the Canadian government compensates Irshad by apologizing, restoring her refugee status, paying her $10 million, and enabling her to regain custody of her children and rebuild her life in Canada. After Irshad returns from the United States to Canada, she takes several significant steps that reflect her determination to reclaim her life, reunite with her children, and continue her advocacy. Here's a summary based on the novel. 1. Moves to Toronto and fights for her children. Irshad immediately moves to Toronto, Canada, after her ordeal in the United States. Her primary goal is to regain custody of her 6 children, who had been adopted by Christian families during her previous legal troubles and imprisonment. 2. Legal battle and visitation rights. She initiates a legal battle with the Canadian government and the Department of Social Work to reclaim custody of her children. 3. Advocacy and public speaking. Irshad becomes an outspoken advocate for women's rights and a critic of the abuses she witnessed in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. She gives speeches at Canadian universities, such as McMaster University, writes books, and founds an association for abused Muslim women. Her activism sparks controversy and sometimes leads to backlash from both Muslim communities and academic institutions. 4. Reunites her children and supports their education. With the compensation and financial resources she receives, including a large settlement from the Canadian government, Irshad arranges for her children to be sent to her loving Christian parents in Sydney, Australia. She deposits money into joint accounts for their care and ensures they are enrolled in private Christian schools, focusing on their well-being and education. 5. Continues her international advocacy. Irshad does not limit her campaign to Canada. She travels to France and other countries, giving controversial speeches about the abuse of women in Islam and the dangers of religious extremism. Her activism makes her a target for threats and even assassination attempts, but she persists in her mission. 6. Personal healing and family reunification. After surviving an assassination attempt and a period of amnesia, Irshad, now Susan again, eventually regains her memory and reunites with her family. She continues to use her story to help other women escape cycles of abuse and oppression and works to rescue her children and grandchildren from similar fates. Direct quote from the novel. Irshad immediately moved to Toronto and took back all her 6 children. This time she did not enter Canada like a thief in the night and lived incognito as she did before. Soon after her arrival, she began speaking out publicly and in the media against the teachings of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, which she believes are behind all the terrorist attacks, assaults, persecution, abuse, and violence against Muslim women. She also spoke openly about her bitter experience in Saudi Arabia. She was invited by some respected people in France to come to Paris and talk about Islamic misogynistic teachings on women and Islamic terrorists. After returning from Australia, the brave woman Irshad decided not to confine her campaign against Islam to Toronto, but to start speaking in several Canadian cities. Here is a summary of Irshad's speech in France, as described in the novel For the Sake of My Children. Summary of Irshad's speech in France. Focus on women's rights and Islamic texts. Irshad delivers 2 controversial speeches in Paris, focusing on the abuse of women in Islam and the roots of Islamic terrorism. She explicitly condemns the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, arguing that these texts are the main source of terrorism and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. She demands that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. Critique of military solutions. She argues that the problem of terrorism cannot be solved by military means alone. According to Irshad, even if Western forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. She explains that these groups are not conventional soldiers, but suicide bombers and invisible enemies who blend in with civilians and cannot be easily fought by traditional armies. Roots of terrorism. Irshad states that the real source of terrorism is the ideology found in the Quran and hadiths. She claims that as long as these texts are not banned, terrorism will persist. She also describes how the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad encourage hatred of Jews and Christians, and how Islamic law discriminates against non-Muslims and women. Personal testimony. In her speech, Irshad shares her own experiences of abuse, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and violence, linking them directly to religious justifications in Islamic texts. She describes how her daughter was subjected to FGM and child marriage, and how she herself was beaten and abused under the authority of Quranic verses and hadiths. Call to action. Irshad concludes by urging Western societies to expose and ban the sources of Islamic terrorism, namely the Quran and hadiths. She calls for secularization of Muslim-majority countries and for the encouragement of moderate Muslims to resist fundamentalist interpretations. Direct quotes from the novel. She explicitly condemned the 2 sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, she demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. Irshad stated that the unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting against the terrorists of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Mujahideen ISIS. If the American Marines and other NATO forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Mujahideen of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. The only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally. In her sermons, Irshad elaborated on the status of women in Islam. One of the phrases she said that annoyed Muslim men, as well as Muslim women, was that Islam treats women like animals or something lower than dumb brutes. She cited some hadiths of the Messenger of Allah Muhammad in his saying, "A woman is like a goat and a she-camel because everything is mounted." Aftermath. Her speeches spark outrage among Muslims in France, leading to protests and accusations of lying and fabricating hadiths. She is both praised for her courage and condemned for her criticism of Islam. Her message is seen as a call to action for secular societies to confront the roots of religious extremism and misogyny. Here's a deeper breakdown of Irshad's arguments on terrorism from her speech in Paris, with direct quotes and analysis from the novel. Irshad's main arguments on terrorism, Paris speech. 1. The roots of terrorism in Islamic texts. Irshad argues that the main sources of terrorism are the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. She explicitly condemned the two sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, she demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. 2. Military solutions are not enough. She claims that military action alone cannot defeat terrorism. Irshad stated that the unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting against the terrorists of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Mujahideen ISIS. If the American Marines and other NATO forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Mujahideen of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. Likewise, the 75 countries that joined the U.S.-led coalition will not eradicate the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS and other terrorist groups in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Somalia, Nigeria, Sudan, Lebanon, Israel, and the rest of the 55 Muslim-majority countries in the world. 3. The nature of the Mujahideen. She explains why the Mujahideen are so difficult to defeat. She explained this point by saying that the Muslim Mujahideen with whom she lived for many years in Afghanistan are not military soldiers. They were not trained to fight as army soldiers, but as suicide bombers. Besides, the Mujahideen are invisible enemies who are impossible to identify and fight against as military combatants wearing military uniforms that should distinguish them from innocent defenseless citizens. They can move freely among other citizens without being identified and blow themselves up without being suspected before they carry out their cowardly terrorist act. The Muslim militants of the Mujahideen of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups do not aim to win the battle against the NATO forces, but rather to intimidate and terrify their foes among the infidels, hypocritical Muslims, and apostates who are allied with the enemies of Islam. 4. The only solution. Ban the source texts. Irshad's most controversial argument is that the only way to defeat terrorism is to ban the Quran and hadiths. The only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally. She said that for this reason, the unsurmountable problem of Islamic terrorism will not disappear from the contemporary world unless the two main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, are banned. 5. On the nature of true Muslims and terrorists. She challenges the Western narrative that terrorists are not true Muslims. Many Western leaders have wrongly claimed that terrorist groups such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Muslim Brotherhood, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Janjaweed, Hamas, Hezbollah, and many others in the Muslim world are not true Muslims, but rather have a twisted version of Islam, which is the religion of peace. By this they mean that the terrorists have a wrong knowledge or ideology of Islam. These world leaders and famous Western media agencies, such as CNN and BBC World News, always present moderate Muslims as true Muslims while describing Islamic terrorists as extremists or fanatics. Despite this, the verses of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad support and praise Islamic terrorists, promise them great rewards, and openly and vigorously condemn moderate Muslims as infidels and hypocrites. 6. On the spread of hatred and violence. She details how the texts incite hatred and violence. The only reason that motivated these mujahideen to hate the infidels and love to kill them is the inflammatory verses of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad that called for jihad against the so-called enemies of God, those who are called impure infidels in Islam. The Quran commands the Prophet Muhammad, saying to him, "O Prophet, instigate the believers to fight. If 20 of you are patient, they will defeat 200, and if there are 100 of you, they defeat 1,000 of those who disbelieve, because they are a people who do not understand. It is not for a prophet to have prisoners of war until he is thickening the earth with blood. You want the goods of this world, and God wants the hereafter. And God is mighty. He is wise." Surah Al-Anfal 8, verses 65 and 67. 7. On the need for secularization. She calls for secularization of Muslim-majority countries. Irshad concluded her speech by saying that it is the duty of non-Muslim forces to fight, defeat, and destroy Islamic terrorism wherever it exists. For her, Muslims should not be allowed to implement Sharia law even in their own Islamic lands and countries. There are about 55 Muslim-majority countries in the world. These countries must be secularized and prevented from becoming Islamic countries. The lukewarm so-called moderate Muslims should only be commended and encouraged to stay that way. 8. On the nature of the terrorist threat. She uses a vivid metaphor. Irshad illustrated her point by likening a Muslim terrorist to a computer virus. If we leave it in our system, it will destroy it, and if we isolate it, the virus will always be a threat. The only way to deal with a terrorist is to remove him from human society. Therefore, the Australian woman, Irshad Al-Shamari, strongly supports NATO's war on terror in Afghanistan and the US-led coalition against the Islamic State's caliphate group in Syria and Iraq. Summary table. Key points from Irshad's Paris speech. Argument. Direct quote or paraphrase. Source of terrorism. The main sources of terrorism in the world are the Quran and Hadiths, and they are the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Military solutions. The unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting. If the American Marines and other NATO forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Mujahideen. Nature of Mujahideen. Not military soldiers, but as suicide bombers, invisible enemies who are impossible to identify. Solution. Ban texts. The unsurmountable problem of Islamic terrorism will not disappear unless the two main texts of Islam are banned. True Muslims versus terrorists. The verses of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad support and praise Islamic terrorists, promise them great rewards, and openly and vigorously condemn moderate Muslims as infidels and hypocrites. Spread of hatred. The only reason that motivated these mujahideen to hate the infidels and love to kill them is the inflammatory verses of the Quran and the hadiths. Secularization. These countries must be secularized and prevented from becoming Islamic countries. Terrorist as virus. Likening a Muslim terrorist to a computer virus. If we leave it in our system, it will destroy it, and if we isolate it, the virus will always be a threat. The only way to deal with a terrorist is to remove him from human society. Irshad's speech in France, including direct quotes and a breakdown of her arguments on terrorism in Islam, as well as the reaction of Muslims in France. Summary of Irshad's speech in France. Irshad's speeches in Paris are described as highly controversial and provocative, focusing on the abuse of women in Islam and the roots of terrorism in Islamic texts. She argues that the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are the main sources of terrorism and the oppression of women. She calls for these texts to be banned in Western countries. Key arguments from her speech. Condemnation of Islamic texts. She explicitly condemned the two sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, She demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. On the roots of terrorism, in her speech, Ershad stated that the unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting against the terrorists of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Mujahideen ISIS. If the American Marines and other NATO forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Mujahideen of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. Likewise, the 75 countries that joined the US-led coalition will not eradicate the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS and other terrorist groups in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Somalia, Nigeria, Sudan, Lebanon, Israel, and the rest of the 55 Muslim-majority countries in the world. She explained this point by saying that the Muslim Mujahideen with whom she lived for many years in Afghanistan are not military soldiers. They were not trained to fight as army soldiers, but as suicide bombers. Besides, the Mujahideen are invisible enemies who are impossible to identify and fight against as military combatants wearing military uniforms that should distinguish them from innocent defenseless citizens. They can move freely among other citizens without being identified and blow themselves up without being suspected before they carry out their cowardly terrorist act. The Muslim militants of the Mujahideen of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups do not aim to win the battle against the NATO forces, but rather to intimidate and terrify their foes among the infidels, hypocritical Muslims, and apostates who are allied with the enemies of Islam. Her solution, the brave Australian, Ershad Al-Shamari, concluded her speech by saying that the only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally. She said that for this reason, the unsurmountable problem of Islamic terrorism will not disappear from the contemporary world unless the two main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, are banned. The treatment of women. In her sermons, Ershad elaborated on the status of women in Islam. One of the phrases she said that annoyed Muslim men, as well as Muslim women, was that Islam treats women like animals or something lower than dumb brutes. She cited some hadiths of the Messenger of Allah Muhammad in his saying, "A woman is like a goat and a she-camel because everything is mounted." That means Allah created a woman like any female animal for the Muslim man to climb over her body and fuck her. All these female creatures, goats, she-camel, and woman, are made to climb on and have sex with by their male counterparts. This bad hadith shows us how Muhammad reduced the woman to a sexual being created by God for the man to climb her body and fuck her as a dog fucks its bitch. Muhammad also said, the dog, the donkey, and the woman invalidate the man's prayer if they pass in front of him while he is praying, and for this reason, they cut off the prayer between the worshipper and the Qibla. This offensive and misogynistic hadith, intended to show the woman as a defiled creature and therefore as impure, invalidates the man's prayer. On the only solution, she said that the unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting. The only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally, unless the two main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, are banned. Direct quotes from the novel. Here are some direct quotes from the novel about her speech and the reaction. According to Ershad, the best way to deal with the Muslim terrorist is to eliminate him. He is like a cancer that, if it is not removed, affects other parts of the body. She also believes that a Muslim terrorist is more dangerous if he is captured and imprisoned. He will pass his incurable contagious disease onto other prison inmates who are either Christians, atheists, or agnostics. It has become a common phenomenon in Western countries, especially in the United States. The notorious criminals are now and then converted to Islam by their Muslim inmates, and when they get out, they become homegrown terrorists or travel to the Middle East and join the modern Islamic terrorist groups. Today, there are 86 Islamic terrorist groups in the world. Muslim response in France. Her talk about the abuse of Muslim women sparked a lot of controversy and resentment among Muslims. Muslim men and women alike in France accused her of lying and fabricating hadiths about the Prophet Muhammad. The second speech of the Australian woman Ershad angered the Muslims and pushed them to fill the streets of Paris, demonstrating against those who invited the infidel Australian Christian woman impersonating a Muslim woman apostate to the country and gave her a platform to insult their beautiful religion, Islam, the religion of peace, and their infallible prophet Muhammad. They claimed that there is no other religion in the world that honors women and puts them in the best social status as Islam. Deeper breakdown of her arguments. Terrorism is rooted in Islamic texts. She argues that the Quran and Hadiths are not just misinterpreted by extremists, but that the violent and misogynistic teachings are present in the core texts themselves. Military solutions are insufficient. She claims that military action alone cannot defeat terrorism because the ideology is perpetuated by religious doctrine. Banned on Islamic texts. Her most controversial proposal is that the Quran and Hadiths should be banned in Western countries to prevent the spread of terrorism and the abuse of women. Women's rights. She highlights the systematic abuse of women, citing specific Hadiths and Quranic verses that, in her view, justify violence, polygamy, child marriage, and female genital mutilation. Call to action. She urges Western societies to recognize the roots of terrorism and misogyny in these texts and to take legislative action. Why Ershad decides to fly from France to Afghanistan. Ershad decides to fly from France to Afghanistan because she is determined to search for her eldest daughter, Aisha, who was kidnapped, raped, and imprisoned by Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid. After her controversial speeches in Paris about the abuse of women in Islam and Islamic terrorism, Ershad feels a renewed sense of purpose and urgency to rescue her daughter from the hands of her abuser in Afghanistan. Here's a summary of her motivation and the context for her decision. Personal mission. After her activism and public speaking in France, Ershad's thoughts return to her own family, especially her daughter Aisha, who was taken from her years earlier and forced into marriage with an elderly Taliban leader. The trauma and injustice suffered by her daughter haunt Ershad, and she feels compelled as a mother to try to rescue her, no matter what the risk. Change in Afghanistan. Ershad is aware that the situation in Afghanistan has changed since the fall of the Taliban government, with NATO forces now present. She believes this might give her a better chance to find and free her daughter. Preparation and risk. She arranges for her other children to be cared for in Canada and travels undercover, disguising herself as a Muslim woman to avoid detection and danger in Afghanistan. Direct quote from the novel. After her successful speeches in Paris, the capital of France, the Australian mother, Ershad, decided to return to Afghanistan and search for her eldest daughter, Aisha, who had been kidnapped, raped, and imprisoned by Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid. Then she called the babysitter of her 6 children in Canada and asked her to extend her stay at her apartment in Toronto. When the babysitter agreed to continue taking care of her children, Ershad decided to return to Kandahar in Afghanistan. She knew and understood that such a trip involved high risks and might expose her to terrorist attacks. Despite this, the brave Australian mother is no longer a persecuted Muslimah, but rather a Christian who believes in God and knows that Afghanistan is not what it used to be. When she was living under persecution and violence, the country was controlled by the Taliban government and the Al-Qaeda group, while she was under the tyranny of her abusive Muslim husband. However, after the NATO forces entered the country and removed the Taliban government from power, a lot of changes happened. The mother Ershad decides to travel undercover and pretend to be a Muslimah woman again. So, she flew straight from Paris to Kabul. In summary, Ershad's decision to fly from France to Afghanistan is driven by her maternal determination to rescue her daughter Aisha from abuse and captivity, her hope that the changed political situation might help her succeed, and her willingness to risk her own safety for the sake of her child. When Ershad voluntarily returns to Kandahar city in Afghanistan to search for her daughter Aisha, she finds the city and her former world dramatically changed, both physically and socially. Here's a detailed summary, including direct references from the novel. What Ershad sees in Kandahar. Physical and social changes. After years away, Ershad is stunned by the transformation in Kandahar. The Taliban government has been removed from power by NATO forces, and the city is no longer under the same regime of terror and strict religious control. She observes women walking the streets without male guardians, girls with backpacks heading to school, and some women not wearing the full burqa that was previously mandatory. Even some Afghan men are wearing Western clothes like shirts and trousers, which would have been unthinkable during Taliban rule. Mixed reality. Despite these changes, Ershad also notices that some outdated and oppressive customs persist. Some women are still fully veiled, and some men still dress and behave like the mujahideen she remembers from her years of suffering. The city is a mix of progress and lingering tradition, and the memories of her trauma are triggered by the familiar sights and sounds of Kandahar. Ruins and emptiness. When Ershad visits the place where the mujahideen camps once stood, she finds it in ruins and deserted. The camps are no longer inhabited by people or even animals. Even the mosquitoes and flies have left. This emptiness underscores the collapse of the world she once knew and the difficulty of her search for Aisha. Emotional impact. The return to Kandahar is emotionally overwhelming for Ershad. She is haunted by memories of abuse, violence, and loss, her own suffering, the stoning of her friend Scheherazade, her unjust imprisonment, and the kidnapping and rape of her daughter. The city is both a place of hope for finding Aisha and a landscape of trauma. Direct quote from the novel. Once in that hellish city, the horribly abused Australian woman recalled the dark years she spent with those mujahideen barbarians and her cruel Arab Muslim husband, Mustafa. It was as if she was rewatching a scary horror movie all over again when her mind began to reproduce those horrific memories of her torture and abuse. She could still see the innocent Canadian Muslim girl, Scheherazade, as she lay dying under those stones and bricks that had been thrown over her tender body half buried in the hot earth when she was brutally stoned for her alleged adultery with her Syrian lover. She recalled her experience of being kidnapped and imprisoned in that tomb shrine for 2 days and her agonizing suffering with the head of the village of Sharaf al-Banat, the human beast who tried to rape her in his home. She recalled her unjust imprisonment for 12 months in a death concentration camp euphemistically called the Nawashi's Women's Prison in Kandahar city. She could not believe she was able to survive in that dangerous prison. She knows that in that infernal city, she was subjected to many cases of abuse and violence, and her daughter was repeatedly raped by that evil old man, and she is still being abused and imprisoned until the present time. In her heart, she wished to find him and kill him with her own hands. She also remembered that this evil Muslim old man turned some of her children into slaves and beggars in the streets of Kandahar, and her daughters into slaves for his Afghan wives. The same city reminded her of her 2 sons who were kidnapped from her hands at gunpoint and turned into terrorists and killed in the jihad war for the sake of God. She understood that her husband, the Arab Muslim terrorist Mustafa, was responsible for all the suffering and abuse that she and their 7 children went through. He also participated in the cowardly terrorist attacks in the United States on September 11, 2001, which claimed the lives of 3,000 innocent Americans in one day. In summary, Ershad finds Kandahar city changed on the surface, with some signs of progress and freedom, but also haunted by the remnants of its violent past. The Mujahideen camps are in ruins, and the city is a landscape of both hope and trauma for her. Her return is emotionally charged, filled with memories of suffering, and driven by her determination to find and rescue her daughter Aisha. Here's a detailed summary of what Ershad does after arriving in Kandahar to search for her daughter Aisha, including her next steps and the challenges she faces. Arrival and initial steps in Kandahar. Arrival in Afghanistan. After her speeches in Paris, Ershad flies undercover from France to Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan, disguising herself as a Muslim woman to avoid detection. She is struck by the changes in Afghanistan since the fall of the Taliban. Women are now seen walking in public, some girls are going to school, and not all women are veiled. However, she also notices that some old customs and dangers remain. Travel to Kandahar. From Kabul, Ershad takes a flight to Kandahar, the city where she believes her daughter Aisha is being held by Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, the man who kidnapped and married her when she was just a child. Search for Aisha. Investigative approach. Irshad knows that finding Aisha will be extremely difficult. The Mujahideen camps where she and her children once lived are now deserted and in ruins. She learns from locals that many Taliban and Arab fighters have fled to Pakistan or are hiding in remote areas. Still, she suspects that Mullah Abu Hamid, who used to commute between the camps and his mansion in Kandahar, might still be in the city. Hiring help. Realizing she cannot search the city alone, Irshad hires local Afghans to help her. She pays them generously and provides details about her daughter and the man who took her. After a week of searching, one of the hired women brings news of a married woman named Aisha al-Shamari, whose husband is known as Mullah Omar Bismillah, the same man as Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, who has changed his name to hide his identity. Verification. To confirm this, Irshad visits the Grand Mosque in Kandahar and waits outside until prayers end. She spots the mullah, now going by Omar Bismillah, and follows him to his home, noting the address for future action. Here is a vivid description of the scene when Irshad, sitting in her taxi, witnesses the veneration of Imam Abu Hamid as he emerges from the Grand Mosque in Kandahar city. As Irshad waits in her taxi outside the Grand Mosque in downtown Kandahar, she is acutely aware of the tension and anticipation in the air. The mosque, a central landmark in the city, is bustling with worshippers finishing their noon prayers. Irshad, disguised and cautious, remains inside the vehicle, her eyes fixed on the stream of men pouring out of the mosque's doors. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. The crowd's attention converges on a single figure, Imam Abu Hamid, now known as Mullah Omar Bismillah. He emerges from the mosque, surrounded by a group of bearded followers. The reverence shown to him is immediate and striking. Some men rush forward to kiss his hands, a gesture of deep respect and submission. Others kneel and kiss the very ground his feet have touched, as if sanctifying the earth beneath him. A few even go so far as to drink the water he used for ablution, believing it to be blessed. Irshad observes in disbelief as the Imam's followers treat him with a level of veneration that borders on worship. They carry his belongings, clear a path for him, and shower him with praises. The scene is reminiscent of the way the Prophet Muhammad was treated in his time, except that, as Irshad notes, the only thing missing is the seeking of blessings from the Imam's spit and urine, as was done with the Prophet by his companions. The spectacle is both awe-inspiring and unsettling for Irshad. She is struck by the power and authority the Imam commands over the people and by the almost superstitious devotion of his followers. The sight fills her with a mix of anger and sorrow, knowing that this same man is the one who kidnapped, abused, and imprisoned her daughter Aisha. As the Imam is ushered into his car by his chauffeur, Irshad's resolve hardens. She notes down the address where he is taken, determined to take the next step in her quest to rescue her daughter. This scene powerfully illustrates the cult of personality and religious authority surrounding Imam Abu Hamid, as well as Irshad's emotional turmoil as she witnesses the veneration of the man who has caused her family so much harm. Irshad's emotional reaction. From the back seat of her taxi, Irshad is gripped by a storm of emotions as she observes this display. Her initial reaction is a mix of shock and disbelief at the intensity of the veneration. She is appalled by the almost superstitious reverence shown to a man she knows to be a predator and abuser, her daughter's kidnapper and rapist. The sight of grown men, some of them educated and respected in the community, debasing themselves before the Imam fills her with a sense of horror and alienation. Irshad's heart pounds with righteous anger and helplessness. She is reminded of the immense power these religious figures wield, not just over their followers, but over the entire social and legal fabric of the society. The Imam's ability to command such devotion, to be treated as infallible and above reproach, is precisely what enabled him to commit unspeakable acts against her daughter and other vulnerable women and children. As she watches, Irshad feels a surge of grief and frustration. She is haunted by memories of her own suffering and that of her children at the hands of men like Abu Hamid, who use religion as a shield for their crimes. The veneration of the Imam is not just a personal affront, it is a symbol of the broader system of oppression and injustice that she has fought against for years. Irshad's emotional turmoil is compounded by a sense of isolation. She realizes that, in this society, her voice and the voices of women like her are drowned out by the collective adulation of men like Abu Hamid. The scene crystallizes for her the enormity of the challenge she faces in seeking justice for her daughter and others. Despite her fear and anger, Irshad's resolve hardens. The spectacle she witnesses from her taxi window becomes a catalyst, strengthening her determination to expose the truth and fight for her daughter's freedom, no matter the risks. The moment is both devastating and galvanizing, a reminder of the power of religious authority and of the courage required to confront it. In summary, Irshad's emotional reaction is a complex blend of shock, anger, grief, and renewed determination. The veneration of Imam Abu Hamid is both a personal and symbolic affront, highlighting the deep-rooted power structures she must challenge to rescue her daughter and seek justice. Here is a more detailed description of the crowd's behavior as Irshad observes from her taxi the veneration of Imam Abu Hamid, now known as Mullah Omar Bismillah, as he emerges from the Grand Mosque in Kandahar. The crowd's behavior in detail. As the noon prayer concludes, the mosque's massive doors open and a river of worshippers flows out into the sunlit square. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation. The crowd's attention is fixed on the entrance, waiting for the appearance of the revered Imam. When Mullah Abu Hamid finally emerges, the energy in the crowd shifts palpably. Men surge forward, eager to be close to him. Some of the most devout followers rush to the front, bowing deeply or even kneeling on the ground in front of the Imam as a sign of humility and respect. A few, overcome with emotion, attempt to kiss the very ground where his feet have passed. Others press forward to kiss his hands, their faces alight with awe, as if touching him will bring them blessing or spiritual merit. Several men jostle for position, trying to get as close as possible. Some bring small containers and collect the water the Imam used for his ritual ablutions, believing it to be imbued with barakah blessing. They anoint themselves with it, or even drink it, convinced of its power to heal or protect. The Imam's personal attendants and loyal followers form a protective ring around him, carrying his shoes, prayer rug, and other belongings. They clear a path through the throng, but the crowd presses in, undeterred by the presence of guards. The air is filled with murmurs of reverence. Some men recite prayers or whisper supplications as the Imam passes, while others simply gaze at him with adoration, their eyes shining with devotion. A few of the more zealous devotees kneel and touch their foreheads to the ground, as if in the presence of a living saint. Some even attempt to touch the hem of his robe, believing that any contact with his person will bring them closer to God. The Imam moves through the crowd with practiced composure, acknowledging their gestures with a serene nod or a raised hand, his face a mask of calm authority. The entire scene is one of collective veneration bordering on fanaticism. The Imam is treated not just as a religious leader, but as an infallible figure, almost a living relic. The crowd's behavior is a blend of awe, desperation, and longing for spiritual connection, manifesting in physical acts of submission and adulation. In summary, the crowd's behavior is marked by intense, almost ritualistic displays of reverence, bowing, kissing hands and ground, collecting ablution water, jostling for proximity, and treating the Imam as a living saint whose presence is believed to confer blessing and spiritual power. Next steps and escalation. Contacting authorities, knowing that local police are often corrupt or sympathetic to the Taliban, Irshad decides to approach NATO forces instead. She disguises herself as a Western reporter and gains access to a NATO checkpoint, where she reports the location and identity of the mullah to a senior military officer. The officer takes her information seriously and issues an arrest warrant for Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, Omar Bismillah. Arrest and reunion. That evening, NATO soldiers raid the mullah's house and arrest him. Aisha is found in the house with her 3 children, Irshad's grandchildren. The reunion between Irshad and Aisha is emotional and bittersweet, as Aisha has suffered years of abuse and has been told lies about her mother's abandonment. Irshad learns that Aisha was reduced to a maidservant by the mullah's other wives and was repeatedly abused and raped, even by the mullah's sons. Aftermath, Irshad faces new challenges, obtaining travel documents for Aisha and her children, securing their safety, and arranging for their eventual relocation to Australia. She bribes officials to get Afghan passports, applies for visas, and eventually manages to bring Aisha and her grandchildren to India and then to Australia, where they are reunited with Irshad's parents and begin the process of healing and education. Direct quotes from the novel. After a week of intense searching, an Afghan hired female searcher came in with some information about her daughter. Although the name of the married woman found by the Afghani woman matched the name of her daughter, her husband's name was different. The wife's name is Aisha Al-Shamari, but her husband is known as Mullah Omar Bismillah, whose last name means in the name of God. This venerable Mullah Omar, in the name of God, is the Imam of the great mosque in the city center. The educated and intelligent Australian mother did not take another second to conclude that the wife was her daughter, Aisha, and that the husband, Omar Bismillah, or in the name of Allah, was Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid himself. Instead of going to Kandahar City Police Station, the white Australian foreign mother decided to take the matter up to NATO forces. Her experience with Muslim men in the Muslim world made her understand that the power of the Islamic police is more dangerous to society than any other government department. After providing all the information required, an arrest warrant was issued for Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, who is now known as Imam Omar Bismillah. That same evening, the Imam of the city's largest mosque, Umar Satan Allah, was surprised when more than 30 foreign soldiers raided his house and arrested him. Aisha is approaching the age of 19 when she is freed from the tyranny of that evil old man who started raping and assaulting her since the age of 10. For 9 years, she was kidnapped, raped, imprisoned, and repeatedly abused by this sinister old Muslim man. When the Australian mother, Irshad, saw her beloved daughter, Aisha, after many years of painful separation, she did not know whether to cry or rejoice. She could not believe her eyes when she saw her daughter coming out of the evil mullah's house with her 3 young children. In summary, Irshad's search in Kandahar is methodical and courageous. She hires locals, verifies leads, and ultimately leverages NATO's authority to rescue her daughter from years of abuse. The reunion is emotional, and the next steps involve securing documents and safe passage for Aisha and her children. Here's a step-by-step summary of how Irshad finds Mullah Abu Hamid and her daughter Aisha after returning to Kandahar, based strictly on the novel's content, with direct references and details. 1. Irshad's return to Kandahar. After her speeches in France, Irshad decides to return to Afghanistan to search for her kidnapped daughter, Aisha. She flies to Kabul, then to Kandahar, disguising herself in Islamic dress to avoid detection. She finds the old Mujahideen camps deserted and ruined, but remembers that Mullah Abu Hamid used to live in a large house in Kandahar city with his wives and children. 2. Hiring help to search. Realizing the difficulty of searching alone, Irshad hires local Afghans to help her find Aisha. She explains that her daughter is named Aisha Al-Shamari and was married to Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid. She promises a large reward for information. 3. Tracking down the mullah. After a week, a hired Afghan woman brings news. She has found a married woman named Aisha Al-Shamari, but her husband is listed as Mullah Omar Bismillah, the Imam of the Grand Mosque in Kandahar. Irshad quickly deduces that this is the same man, Mullah Abu Hamid, who has changed his name to hide his identity after the fall of the Taliban. 4. Confirming the identity. Irshad goes to the Grand Mosque and waits outside until prayers end. She spots the mullah leaving, surrounded by followers who treat him with reverence. She follows his car to his house, notes the address, and returns to her hotel to plan her next move. 5. Reporting to NATO, not local police. Knowing the risks of reporting to Afghan police, who might protect the mullah, Irshad disguises herself as a Western reporter and approaches a NATO checkpoint. She provides all the information about the mullah's identity and location to a senior Canadian general, who takes her report seriously and issues an arrest warrant. 6. The arrest. That evening, more than 30 foreign soldiers raid the mullah's house and arrest him. Aisha is found in the house with her 3 children, fathered by the mullah. She is now about 19 years old, having been kidnapped and abused since age 10. Irshad is present at the arrest, confronts the mullah, and physically attacks him in anger before being restrained by the soldiers. 7. Mother and daughter reunion. Irshad and Aisha are finally reunited after years of separation. Both are deeply emotional. Aisha cries, not expecting her mother to return, and Irshad is heartbroken to see her daughter reduced to a servant and mother of 3 children by her abuser. The mullah is taken away to face justice, and Irshad begins the process of getting Aisha and her children out of Afghanistan. Direct quote, abridged for clarity. She explained that the girl was married to Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid. After a week of intense searching, an Afghan-hired female searcher came in with some information about her daughter. The wife's name is Aisha al-Shamari, but her husband is known as Mullah Omar Bismillah. Irshad decided to confirm her conclusion before going to the Afghan police. Instead of going to Kandahar City Police Station, the white Australian foreign mother decided to take the matter up to NATO forces. Once inside, she spoke to a senior military general and told him that she had come to reveal the hiding place of a dangerous former Mujahideen leader. That same evening, the imam of the city's largest mosque was surprised when more than 30 foreign soldiers raided his house and arrested him. Aisha is approaching the age of 19 when she is freed from the tyranny of that evil old man who started raping and assaulting her since the age of 10. For 9 years, she was kidnapped, raped, imprisoned, and repeatedly abused by this sinister old Muslim man. When the Australian mother, Irshad, saw her beloved daughter, Aisha, after many years of painful separation, she did not know whether to cry or rejoice. She could not believe her eyes when she saw her daughter coming out of the evil mullah's house with her 3 young children. The reunion scene between Irshad and her daughter Aisha after the mother rescues her daughter from her kidnapper, Mullah Abu Hamid, is deeply emotional and charged with years of trauma, longing, and complicated feelings. After years of separation, abuse, and captivity, Irshad finally tracks down Aisha in Kandahar. Aisha has been held by Mullah Abu Hamid, who married her as a child and subjected her to years of exploitation and violence. Irshad, determined and resourceful, hires local help to find her daughter and confirms Aisha's location by investigating the new identity of her abuser, who is now posing as Mullah Omar Bismillah, the imam of the city's Grand Mosque. Irshad then reports him to NATO forces, who arrest him and rescue Aisha. The moment of reunion. When Aisha is freed from the mullah's house, she emerges with her 3 young children, children born from her years of forced marriage and abuse. Irshad is overwhelmed with emotion, unsure whether to cry or rejoice. She cannot believe her eyes as she sees her daughter, now a young woman, coming out of captivity with her children. Both mother and daughter are overcome. Irshad hugs Aisha and begins to cry bitterly. Aisha, recognizing her mother, also starts to cry. She had not expected her mother to return to Afghanistan and search for her after so many years. The years of separation have left scars. Aisha has been told by her abuser that her mother abandoned her and her siblings, fleeing to Australia for selfish reasons. This has caused Aisha to blame her mother for her suffering, believing she was left behind. Despite this, the physical embrace and the tears they share mark the beginning of healing. Irshad is heartbroken to see how her daughter has been reduced to the status of a maidservant in the mullah's household and is devastated by the suffering Aisha has endured. The emotional tone. The reunion is not simply joyful, it is layered with grief, guilt, and the hope for redemption. Irshad feels responsible for what happened to Aisha, and Aisha's initial reaction is mixed with anger and sorrow for the years lost and the pain endured. The scene is described as one where both women cry together, holding each other after years of forced separation, abuse, and lies. The presence of Aisha's children, Irshad's grandchildren, adds another layer of complexity and sorrow, as Irshad realizes the full extent of what her daughter has suffered. Aftermath. Irshad takes charge of Aisha and her grandchildren, helping them escape Afghanistan and begin the process of healing and rebuilding their lives. She provides for their education and care, determined to give them the safety and opportunities they were denied for so long. In summary, the reunion scene is a powerful moment of catharsis and reconnection, marked by tears, embraces, and the painful acknowledgement of all that has been lost. It is a testament to Irshad's relentless love and Aisha's resilience, and it marks the start of a new chapter for both, as they begin to heal together after years of unimaginable suffering. Aisha's emotional state during the reunion with her mother, Irshad, is profoundly complex and layered with years of trauma, longing, anger, and confusion. Key aspects of Aisha's emotional state. 1. Shock and disbelief. After years of captivity and abuse, Aisha is stunned to see her mother again. She did not expect Irshad to return to Afghanistan and search for her after so long. The sudden appearance of her mother is almost surreal, and Aisha is momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of the reunion. 2. Grief and anger. Aisha has been told by her abuser, Mullah Abu Hamid, that her mother abandoned her and her siblings, fleeing to Australia for selfish reasons. This narrative has caused Aisha to internalize a sense of betrayal and to blame her mother for her suffering. When she first sees Irshad, her emotions are mixed with anger and sorrow for the years lost and the pain endured. 3. Longing and relief. Despite the anger and confusion, there is a deep longing for her mother's love and protection. The physical embrace and shared tears during the reunion allow Aisha to release some of the pain she has carried. There is a sense of relief, however tentative, that she is no longer alone and that someone has come to rescue her. 4. Guilt and shame. Aisha's years of abuse, forced marriage, and exploitation have left her with feelings of shame and unworthiness. She has been reduced to the status of a maidservant in the mullah's household and has suffered repeated violations. The reunion with her mother brings these feelings to the surface, as she is confronted with the reality of her suffering and the innocence that was stolen from her. 5. Confusion and emotional turmoil. The reunion is not simply joyful, it is fraught with emotional turmoil. Aisha's initial reaction is guarded. She is unsure whether to trust her mother or to believe the stories she has been told. The years of separation and manipulation have left her emotionally scarred and uncertain about her place in the world and her relationship with her mother. 6. Gradual hope and healing. As Irshad embraces her and weeps, Aisha begins to feel the possibility of healing. The shared grief and physical closeness mark the beginning of a slow process of rebuilding trust and reclaiming her sense of self. The presence of her mother offers a glimmer of hope that she can move beyond the trauma and start a new chapter in her life. In summary, Aisha's emotional state during the reunion is a storm of shock, anger, grief, longing, shame, and tentative hope. She is deeply wounded by her experiences, but the reunion with her mother is the first step toward healing, even as it brings all her pain to the surface. The scene is a powerful testament to the enduring bond between mother and daughter and the resilience required to begin again after years of unimaginable suffering. During the reunion between Irshad and her daughter Aisha, the scene is charged with intense emotion and years of longing, pain, and trauma. After years of separation, Aisha having been kidnapped, raped, and imprisoned by Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, Irshad finally locates her daughter in Kandahar, living in the house of her abuser under a new name. When Irshad sees Aisha emerge from the house, now a young woman with 3 children of her own, the moment is overwhelming for both mother and daughter. Irshad is overcome with tears and disbelief, unable to process that her daughter, whom she left as a child, is now standing before her, visibly changed by years of abuse and hardship. She rushes to embrace Aisha, crying bitterly and apologizing for all that her daughter has endured. Aisha, in turn, recognizes her mother, and also begins to cry. The reunion is not just a physical one, but an emotional reckoning with all the years lost and the suffering endured. Aisha's emotional state during the reunion. Aisha's emotional state is deeply complex. She is flooded with a mix of shock, disbelief, anger, grief, and a longing for comfort. For years, she has been told by her abuser that her mother abandoned her and her siblings, fleeing to Australia for selfish reasons. This narrative has left Aisha feeling betrayed and resentful, blaming her mother for her suffering. Yet, when she sees Irshad again, those feelings collide with the undeniable bond and love she still feels for her mother. Aisha is initially guarded and conflicted. She wants to believe her mother has come back for her, but she is also haunted by the pain of abandonment and the trauma of her experiences. As Irshad embraces her, Aisha's defenses begin to break down, and she allows herself to cry and grieve for all that she has lost. The reunion is cathartic, but it is also fraught with the scars of the past. Aisha's tears are not just for joy or relief, but also for the years of abuse, the loss of her childhood, and the complicated feelings toward her mother. Memories that flood Aisha during the reunion. During the reunion, Aisha is overwhelmed by a flood of memories. The trauma of being taken from her mother and siblings, and the sense of abandonment that followed. The years of abuse, rape, and forced servitude in the house of Mullah Abu Hamid, including being treated as a maid by his other wives and being repeatedly assaulted by the mullah and his sons. The pain of growing up without her mother's protection, and the lies she was told about Irshad's supposed abandonment. The longing for her mother's love and the hope that she would one day be rescued. The confusion and anger at being told her mother left for selfish reasons, contrasted with the reality of her mother's return and the truth that she never stopped searching for her. These memories are both painful and healing. The reunion allows Aisha to begin processing her trauma, to question the lies she was told, and to start the long journey toward healing and reconciliation with her mother. Summary table: Aisha's emotional state and memories during the reunion. Aspect. Description: initial reaction: shock, disbelief, guardedness, and emotional conflict. Emotional release: tears, grief, longing for comfort, and catharsis. Memories flooding in: trauma of abuse, abandonment, longing for mother, lies told by abuser, hope for rescue. Healing begins. Reconnection with mother, questioning past narratives, start of emotional recovery. This reunion is a pivotal moment in both Aisha's and Irshad's lives, a moment of raw emotion, painful memory, and the first steps toward healing after years of unimaginable suffering. Aisha's view of her mother, Irshad, undergoes a profound transformation during and after their reunion. For years, Aisha had been told by her abuser, Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, that her mother had abandoned her and her siblings, fleeing to Australia for selfish reasons. This narrative was reinforced by the trauma of being left behind, the pain of abuse, and the absence of her mother's protection. As a result, Aisha internalized feelings of betrayal, resentment, and anger toward Irshad, blaming her for her suffering and for not rescuing her sooner. However, when Irshad finally returns to Afghanistan and rescues her daughter from her abuser, Aisha's perspective begins to shift. The physical presence of her mother, the emotional intensity of the reunion, and the realization that Irshad never stopped searching for her all challenge the lies she had been told. As Irshad embraces her, cries, and apologizes for all that Aisha has endured, Aisha is confronted with the truth of her mother's love and sacrifice. Key aspects of how Aisha's view changes. From blame to understanding, Aisha moves from blaming her mother for abandonment to understanding the immense obstacles Irshad faced in trying to protect and rescue her children. She begins to see that her mother was also a victim of the same oppressive systems and that Irshad's absence was not a choice, but a consequence of circumstances beyond her control. From resentment to empathy, as Aisha hears her mother's story and witnesses her pain and regret, she develops empathy for Irshad. She recognizes the suffering her mother endured and the lengths she went to in order to reunite with her children. From distance to reconnection, The reunion allows Aisha to reconnect emotionally with her mother. The bond that was severed by years of separation and abuse begins to heal as Aisha allows herself to feel love, comfort, and safety in her mother's presence. From mistrust to trust, over time, as Irshad continues to support and care for Aisha, her daughter's mistrust is replaced by trust. Aisha comes to believe in her mother's commitment and love, and the two begin the long process of rebuilding their relationship. Summary table: Aisha's changing view of her mother. Before reunion. After reunion and healing process. Felt abandoned and betrayed. Understanding mother's struggle and sacrifice. Blamed mother for her suffering. Develops empathy for Irshad's pain. Resentful and distant. Reconnects emotionally, allows herself to love. Mistrustful and guarded. Begins to trust and rely on her mother again. In essence, Aisha's view of her mother changes from one shaped by pain, resentment, and misinformation to one of empathy, understanding, and renewed love. The reunion is the catalyst for this transformation, allowing both mother and daughter to begin healing from the wounds of the past. Here is a dramatic monologue-style dialogue between Irshad and her daughter Aisha during their emotional reunion after many years of separation, based on the events and emotional context described in the novel. Scene: outside the house of Mullah Abu Hamid in Kandahar. Aisha, now a young woman with 3 children, emerges and sees her mother, Irshad, for the first time in years. Irshad, Aisha. Aisha, is it really you? My baby, my daughter. Her voice breaks, tears streaming down her face. I've searched for you for so long. I never stopped. I never gave up hope, not for a single day. Oh, my child, forgive me. Forgive me for all the years you suffered, for every night you cried alone. I am so sorry, Aisha. I am so sorry, my beloved daughter. Aisha, stunned, trembling, her eyes filling with tears. Mother? Is it really you? I thought you left us. He told me you ran away, that you didn't want us anymore. He said you went to Australia to find a new life, to forget about your children. I waited for you, Mama. I waited and waited, but you never came. Why did you leave me? Why did you let him take me? Irshad, sobbing, reaching out to embrace her. No, Aisha, no. I never left you by choice. They wouldn't let me take you. I fought, I begged, I risked everything. I was locked away, beaten, imprisoned. Every day I thought of you. Every day I prayed for a miracle to bring you back to me. I would have died for you, Aisha. I would have given anything to save you. Aisha, her voice shaking, torn between anger and longing. I wanted to hate you. I tried to believe what they said, that you abandoned me. But every night, I remembered your voice, your arms around me, the way you used to sing to me when I was scared. I wanted you to come. I wanted you to save me. But you never came. Irshad, holding her tighter. I am here now, my love. I am here. I will never leave you again. I promise you, with all my heart. I know I can never erase your pain, but I am here to help you heal. You are not alone anymore, Aisha. You are not alone. Aisha, her tears finally breaking free, she collapses into her mother's arms. I missed you, Mama. I missed you so much. I thought I would never see you again. I thought I would die in that house, forgotten, unloved. But you came. You came for me. Irshad, weeping with relief and love. I will always come for you, Aisha. Always. You are my daughter. You are my heart. We will face the world together now. We will heal together. This monologue captures the raw emotion, the pain of separation, the bitterness of betrayal, and the beginning of healing and reconnection between mother and daughter. It reflects Aisha's initial anger and mistrust, her longing for her mother's love, and the gradual realization that Irshad never stopped fighting for her. Here's a detailed, emotionally rich scene and monologue for the reunion between Irshad and her daughter Aisha after years of separation and abuse by Mullah Abu Hamid, including dialogue from all 3 characters based strictly on the content of the novel. Scene: the reunion of Irshad and Aisha. Irshad stands outside the house, her heart pounding as she sees Aisha, now a young woman, but with the haunted eyes of someone who has survived unimaginable trauma. Aisha emerges, clutching her 3 young children, her body thin and her face marked by years of hardship. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stare at each other, both unsure if this is real. Aisha's emotional state. Aisha is overwhelmed by a flood of conflicting emotions: disbelief, anger, longing, and deep pain. She has spent years believing her mother abandoned her, as Mullah Abu Hamid repeatedly told her. Now, seeing Irshad in front of her, those memories and feelings crash over her, memories of her childhood, of being taken from her mother, of the abuse she endured, and of the hope she had nearly lost. She feels shock and disbelief, unsure if this is a dream or reality. Anger and betrayal, years of believing her mother left her to suffer. Longing and hope, a desperate wish for comfort and rescue. Confusion, torn between the lies she was told and the evidence of her mother's return. Grief and trauma, haunted by the abuse, rape, and forced servitude she endured. Memories flooding Aisha. As Aisha sees her mother, memories rush back. Her early childhood in Australia, feeling safe and loved. The day she was taken from her mother and forced into marriage as a child bride. The pain and humiliation of abuse by Mullah Abu Hamid and his family. The loneliness and longing for her mother's embrace. The lies told to her that her mother abandoned her for a new life in Australia, that she was unwanted. The hope she clung to, that her mother might one day return for her. How Aisha's view of her mother changes. Initially, Aisha's view of her mother is clouded by resentment and pain. She has been told that Irshad left her behind, and she has internalized blame and anger. But as the reunion unfolds and Irshad's love and anguish become clear, Aisha's perspective shifts. She realizes her mother never stopped searching or loving her. She understands that her mother, too, was a victim of forces beyond her control. The anger gives way to empathy, and the longing for reconnection overcomes the walls built by years of trauma. Aisha begins to see her mother not as the source of her suffering, but as her rescuer and ally, a fellow survivor. Monologue/dialogue scene. Irshad rushes to Aisha, tears streaming down her face. Aisha stands frozen, clutching her children, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. Irshad, Aisha, my daughter, is it really you? Oh, God, I've searched for you for so long. I never stopped. I never gave up hope. Please forgive me. I'm here now. I'm here to take you home. Aisha, voice trembling, torn between anger and longing. Why did you leave me? Why did you let him take me? You said you'd protect us. You said you'd never let them hurt me. But you left. You left me with him. You left me alone. Irshad, sobbing, reaching out. No, Aisha, I never left you by choice. They took you from me. They lied to you. I fought for you every day. I begged, I pleaded, I risked my life to find you. I would have died for you. I'm so sorry for every moment you suffered. Please believe me. Aisha, her voice cracks, tears welling up. He told me you ran away. That you didn't want me. That you went back to Australia to find a new life, a new family. He said you forgot about us. Irshad, shaking her head, voice fierce with love. Never. You are my heart, Aisha. My life. I would have burned the world to bring you back. I am here now. I will never leave you again. Mullah Abu Hamid, handcuffed and being led away by NATO soldiers, sneers at the reunion. Mullah Abu Hamid, filled with spite, you see, Aisha? This is the woman who abandoned you. She left you to the mercy of the faithful. She is an infidel now, a traitor to her faith and her family. You belong here, with your husband, with your children. Not with this apostate. Aisha turns to him, voice trembling but strong. You are not my family. You are my jailer. You stole my childhood. You lied to me. My mother is here. She came for me. She never stopped loving me. Ershad, embracing Aisha, whispering, We're going home, Aisha. You're safe now. I promise. No one will ever hurt you again. Aisha collapses into her mother's arms, sobbing. The years of pain, anger, and longing finally break, replaced by the fragile hope of healing and reunion. This scene captures the emotional complexity of their reunion, the pain, the longing, the confrontation with the abuser, and the beginning of healing between mother and daughter. During the reunion with her daughter Aisha, Ershad's emotions are a storm of overwhelming relief, grief, guilt, and fierce maternal love. 1. Overwhelming relief and disbelief. After years of searching, suffering, and fearing the worst, Ershad is almost unable to believe she finally sees her daughter alive. The moment is surreal. She is flooded with gratitude and a sense of miraculous deliverance, as if a prayer she thought would never be answered has suddenly come true. 2. Grief and guilt. Ershad is haunted by the knowledge of what Aisha has endured in her absence: years of abuse, forced marriage, and isolation. She feels deep guilt for not being able to protect her daughter, for every moment Aisha suffered alone, and for the choices and circumstances that led to their separation. She blames herself for the pain her daughter has experienced, even though she knows much of it was beyond her control. 3. Fierce maternal love and protective instinct. Seeing Aisha again reignites Ershad's fierce, protective love. She is desperate to comfort her daughter, to make up for lost years, and to assure her that she never stopped loving or searching for her. Her longing to hold Aisha, to physically shield her from further harm, is almost unbearable. 4. Sorrow and empathy. Ershad is deeply moved by the changes in her daughter, the visible scars of trauma, the children Aisha now has, and the emotional distance that years of manipulation and abuse have created. She aches for the innocence lost and mourns the childhood that was stolen from Aisha. 5. Hope and determination. Despite the pain, Ershad is filled with hope. The reunion is a chance for healing, for rebuilding trust, and for reclaiming the bond between mother and daughter. She is determined to help Aisha recover, to support her through the long process of healing, and to never let her go again. 6. Anger and righteous fury. Ershad also feels a surge of anger at Mullah Abu Hamid for his crimes, at the systems that enabled such abuse, and at the years lost. This anger fuels her resolve to fight for justice and to ensure Aisha's abuser is held accountable. Summary. Ershad's emotions during the reunion are raw and layered. She is at once relieved, heartbroken, guilty, fiercely loving, and determined. The moment is both a culmination of years of suffering and the beginning of a new chapter of hope and healing for both mother and daughter. Mullah Abu Hamid's reaction during the reunion between Ershad and Aisha is marked by a mix of spite, defensiveness, and an attempt to maintain control and authority, even as he is being confronted and ultimately arrested. When Ershad finally finds Aisha and confronts Mullah Abu Hamid, who has kidnapped, abused, and forcibly married her daughter, he responds with spite and manipulation. He tries to undermine Ershad's reunion with Aisha by reminding Aisha of the narrative he has fed her for years, that her mother abandoned her, that she belongs with him and her children, and that Ershad is now an apostate and an infidel. He attempts to sow doubt and guilt, hoping to keep Aisha emotionally tethered to him and the life he forced upon her. Religious justification. Mullah Abu Hamid invokes religious authority, insisting that everything he did was permissible and even righteous according to his interpretation of Islamic law. He frames Ershad's return as a betrayal of faith and family, and tries to shame both mother and daughter for defying him. Loss of power and anger. As he is arrested and led away by authorities, his tone shifts from confident to desperate. He lashes out verbally, trying to reassert dominance, but his words ring hollow in the face of Ershad's determination and Aisha's awakening to the truth. Example dialogue, based on the novel's tone and content. Mullah Abu Hamid, as he is being led away, you see Aisha? This is the woman who abandoned you. She left you to the mercy of the faithful. She is an infidel now, a traitor to her faith and her family. You belong here, with your husband, with your children. Not with this apostate. Aisha, finding her voice, you are not my family. You are my jailer. You stole my childhood. You lied to me. My mother is here. She came for me. She never stopped loving me. Irshad, to Mullah Abu Hamid, you will answer for what you've done. You cannot hide behind your lies or your false piety any longer. Mullah Abu Hamid's reaction is ultimately one of a man losing control, resorting to manipulation, religious rhetoric, and anger, but unable to prevent the truth from coming out or stop Aisha from returning to her mother. Here's a detailed description of Mullah Abu Hamid's reaction during the reunion scene, followed by Irshad's response as she confronts him, based on the content of the novel. Mullah Abu Hamid's reaction. When Irshad finally confronts Mullah Abu Hamid after rescuing her daughter Aisha from his custody, the old mullah is initially taken aback and annoyed to see Irshad standing before him. His face reveals clear irritation and a sense of being threatened by her presence. As Irshad demands the return of her daughter and accuses him of kidnapping and abusing Aisha, Mullah Abu Hamid tries to deflect blame and justify his actions. He accuses Irshad of neglect, claiming she deserted her children and left them in his care for selfish reasons. He further tries to shame her, calling her a racist white woman for refusing to marry him and for wanting to take her children away to a non-Muslim country. He frames his marriage to Aisha as legitimate under Islamic law and insists that he has acted as a proper guardian and husband, dismissing Irshad's outrage as Western ignorance and rebellion. When Irshad's anger boils over and she physically attacks him, grabbing his beard, hitting and kicking him, Mullah Abu Hamid is shocked and cries out for help. He is quickly restrained by others, but his reaction is one of fear, humiliation, and wounded pride. He tries to maintain his authority by accusing Irshad of apostasy and threatening her with religious condemnation, but it is clear that her confrontation has shaken him. Irshad's response and confrontation. Of righteous anger, heartbreak, and maternal protectiveness. Upon learning that her daughter Aisha has been married off and abused by the very man who was supposed to be her guardian, Irshad is turned into a madwoman. Her grief and rage are overwhelming. She is determined to kill the kidnapper and abuser of her innocent child. In front of the Grand Prince and other mujahideen, Irshad physically attacks Mullah Abu Hamid, grabbing his beard, hitting and kicking him with all her might. She calls him a kidnapper, rapist, and child molester, and accuses the senior mullah of being complicit in the abuse by upholding such rulings. Even as she is restrained and tied up, Irshad continues to fight back verbally, calling the mullahs bad religious leaders and threatening to kill them if they do not return her daughter. Her confrontation is not just personal, it is a direct challenge to the religious. Difficulties Irshad faces when trying to take Aisha and her grandchildren out of Afghanistan. Irshad faces numerous and severe obstacles when she tries to take her daughter Aisha and her grandchildren out of Afghanistan. None of Aisha's 3 children have birth certificates, making it extremely difficult to obtain travel documents or prove their identities to foreign authorities. Legal barriers. Aisha is now over 18 and married, so Irshad cannot sponsor her as a dependent child for immigration. Even if the Canadian Immigration Authority agreed to grant her entry to the country with her 3 children, the process would take at least 6 months or more. Visa refusals. Irshad attempts to obtain visitor visas for Aisha and her grandchildren to the UK and other European countries, but all applications are refused. The only Western country that would accept them is Australia, but Irshad lacks proof that Aisha was born in Sydney, and obtaining such proof is a lengthy process. Security risks. Staying in Afghanistan is extremely dangerous for Irshad and her family. The Taliban and their allies would not hesitate to kill her if they discovered she was responsible for the arrest of senior leaders or if they learned of her apostasy and activism. Bribery and corruption. Irshad is forced to pay large bribes to the passport office staff in Kandahar to obtain Afghan passports for her daughter and grandchildren. Time pressure. The process of gathering documents and securing safe passage is slow and fraught with risk. Irshad knows she cannot safely remain in Afghanistan for the months it would take to process Western immigration applications. Temporary solution. Ultimately, Irshad is only able to obtain 6-month visitor visas to India for Aisha and her grandchildren, and she must continue to hide their identities and navigate bureaucratic hurdles even after reaching New Delhi. In summary, Irshad's response to Mullah Abu Hamid is one of fierce, fearless confrontation, driven by maternal love and a demand for justice. Her attempt to rescue Aisha and her grandchildren from Afghanistan is hindered by legal, bureaucratic, and security obstacles, forcing her to rely on bribery, ingenuity, and relentless determination to secure their safety and freedom. Aisha's experience in India, after being rescued by her mother Irshad from years of captivity and abuse in Afghanistan, is a complex journey of adjustment, healing, and gradual transformation. Here's a detailed description based on the novel's content. Aisha's experience in India. 1. Arrival and first impressions. After escaping Afghanistan, Aisha arrives in New Delhi with her mother and her 3 young children. For Aisha, who spent her formative years in the oppressive environment of the Mujahideen camps and as the child bride of Mullah Abu Hamid, India is a bewildering new world. The city is noisy, crowded, and vibrant, utterly unlike the isolation and fear she knew before. She is overwhelmed by the sights and sounds, and initially feels lost and anxious in the unfamiliar environment. 2. Emotional and psychological state. Aisha is deeply traumatized by her years of abuse, repeated rape, forced marriage, and isolation. She struggles with trust, suffers from nightmares, and is wary of strangers. The freedom of movement and the relative safety in India are both liberating and frightening. She is unused to making choices for herself, and simple acts like walking outside or speaking to strangers can trigger anxiety. 3. Education and learning. For the first time in her life, Aisha is given the opportunity to learn. Her mother hires teachers to instruct her and her children in English and basic literacy. Aisha, now 18, cannot read or write in any language, though she can speak English, Arabic, and Afghani. The process of learning is slow and sometimes frustrating, but it is also empowering. Aisha begins to discover her own abilities and to imagine a future beyond survival. 4. Healing and family support. Living with her mother and children in a safe apartment, Aisha starts to heal. She receives emotional support from Irshad, who is determined to help her daughter recover from years of trauma. The relationship between mother and daughter is initially strained because Aisha has internalized much of the blame for her suffering and has been manipulated to believe her mother abandoned her. Over time, through patience and care, Irshad helps Aisha understand the truth and rebuild trust. 5. Social and cultural adjustment. Aisha is amazed by the diversity and openness of Indian society compared to Afghanistan. She sees women walking freely, girls going to school, and people of different religions living side by side. She is both fascinated and intimidated by these differences, and it takes time for her to feel comfortable in public spaces or to interact with people outside her immediate family. 6. Ongoing challenges. Despite the progress, Aisha continues to struggle with the psychological scars of her past. She has difficulty trusting men, fears for her children's safety, and sometimes feels unworthy of happiness or freedom. The process of obtaining legal documents and planning for a future outside India is stressful, but Aisha gradually becomes more hopeful as she sees her children thriving and herself gaining new skills. 7. Looking forward. The time in India is a period of transition for Aisha, a bridge between a life of captivity and the possibility of a new beginning. With her mother's support, she starts to envision a future where she and her children can live with dignity, pursue education, and heal from the wounds of the past. In summary, Aisha's experience in India is marked by initial confusion and anxiety, but also by the slow emergence of hope, self-worth, and the possibility of a new life. The journey is not easy. She faces the daunting task of healing from deep trauma and adapting to a world she never imagined, but with her mother's unwavering support, Aisha begins to reclaim her identity and look forward to a future of freedom and possibility. Aisha's flashbacks are triggered by a variety of sensory and emotional cues, many of which are tied to her traumatic past in Afghanistan and her experiences as a child bride and captive. Based on the novel, here are the main triggers for Aisha's flashbacks. 1. Physical touch and intimacy. Any unexpected or forceful physical contact, even from people she trusts, can trigger memories of abuse, restraint, and rape by Mullah Abu Hamid and his sons. Being touched, especially by men, often causes her to relive moments of violence and helplessness. 2. Loud noises and sudden movements. Loud voices, shouting, or sudden movements around her can bring back memories of being beaten, threatened, or dragged away by force. These triggers are especially strong in crowded or chaotic environments, such as busy streets or unfamiliar public spaces. 3. Isolation and darkness. Being left alone, especially in dark or confined spaces, reminds Aisha of the times she was locked up, tied, or abandoned during her captivity. Nighttime or being in a locked room can cause her to panic or dissociate. 4. Smells and sounds. Certain smells, like incense, sweat, or unwashed bodies, and sounds, such as chanting, prayers, or the call to prayer, can trigger involuntary memories of the camps, the mullah's house, or the rituals surrounding her abuse. 5. Authority figures and religious symbols. Seeing men in religious dress, hearing Quranic recitation, or encountering authority figures, police, imams, or even teachers, can trigger flashbacks to moments when she was powerless, judged, or punished. 6. Discussions of marriage, family, or religion. Conversations about marriage, motherhood, or religious duty can bring up memories of her forced marriage, the loss of her childhood, and the betrayal by those who were supposed to protect her. 7. Caring for her own children. Sometimes, caring for her own children, especially when they are frightened or in need, reminds Aisha of her own vulnerability as a child and the times she was left unprotected. This can trigger both protective instincts and painful memories. In summary, Aisha's flashbacks are triggered by sensory cues, touch, sound, smell, emotional situations, fear, isolation, authority, and reminders of her past trauma, religious rituals, discussions of marriage, or caring for children. These triggers are deeply rooted in her experiences of abuse, captivity, and betrayal, and they continue to affect her as she tries to heal and rebuild her life in India. In summary, Aisha's experience in India is marked by initial confusion and anxiety, but also by the slow emergence of hope, self-worth, and the possibility of a new life. The journey is not easy. She faces the daunting task of healing from deep trauma and adapting to a world she never imagined, but with her mother's unwavering support, Aisha begins to reclaim her identity and look forward to a future of freedom and possibility. Irshad's journey to bring her daughter Aisha and her grandchildren to Australia is fraught with legal, bureaucratic, and emotional challenges, as described in the novel. 1. Locating Aisha and proving identity. After rescuing Aisha from her abuser, Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, in Kandahar, Irshad faces the first hurdle, confirming Aisha's identity and marital status. Aisha's name is found under her maiden name, but her husband is using a different name to hide his identity as a former Taliban leader. Irshad must gather evidence and work with local contacts to prove Aisha's true identity and her relationship to Irshad. 2. Legal barriers and documentation. Aisha and her 3 children have no birth certificates or official documents. This lack of paperwork makes it extremely difficult to apply for visas or immigration to any Western country. Irshad must pay large bribes to the Afghan passport office to obtain Afghan passports for Aisha and her grandchildren. 3. Visa applications and rejections. Irshad attempts to obtain visitor visas for Aisha and her grandchildren to the UK and several European countries, but all applications are refused. The only Western country that will consider their case is Australia, since Aisha was born in Sydney and is technically entitled to citizenship. However, proving her place of birth is a lengthy process that takes several months. 4. Temporary refuge in India. While waiting for documentation, Irshad takes Aisha and her grandchildren to India, the only secular country in the region willing to grant them 6-month visitor visas. In New Delhi, Irshad rents an apartment and begins the process of verifying Aisha's Australian birth. She also hires teachers to help Aisha and her children, who are illiterate due to years of captivity, learn to read and write in English. 5. Emotional and educational rehabilitation. Aisha, now 18, has never attended school and cannot read or write in any language. Irshad works tirelessly to help her daughter and grandchildren catch up academically and emotionally, providing them with private tutors and emotional support. 6. Final immigration to Australia. After 6 months, the Australian Embassy verifies Aisha's place of birth and grants entry visas for her and her children. Irshad then travels with them from New Delhi to Sydney, where they are finally reunited with Irshad's Christian parents, who help care for Aisha and her grandchildren. 7. Financial and social support. Irshad opens a bank account for Aisha, deposits a large sum of money, and ensures her daughter and grandchildren are enrolled in a private Christian school. The family is finally able to begin a new life, free from the trauma and oppression they endured. Summary table. Key steps in Irshad's rescue and immigration journey. Step. Challenge/action. Locating Aisha. Identifying her under a new name, confirming her identity. Documentation. Obtaining Afghan passports via bribes. Visa applications. Facing repeated rejections from Western embassies. Temporary stay in India. Securing Indian visas, renting apartment, starting education. Rehabilitation. Addressing illiteracy and trauma. Australian immigration. Proving birth, securing visas, traveling to Sydney. Settlement. Financial support, school enrollment, family reunification. In essence, Irshad's determination, resourcefulness, and willingness to navigate corrupt systems, endure bureaucratic delays, and provide emotional support are what ultimately allow her to bring Aisha and her grandchildren to safety in Australia. Irshad's parents play a crucial, compassionate, and stabilizing role in the lives of both Irshad and her daughter Aisha and grandchildren after their arrival in Australia. Their involvement is multidimensional, providing emotional, practical, and financial support during a period of intense transition and healing. 1. Emotional support and reconciliation. Forgiveness and acceptance. After years of estrangement, Irshad's parents welcome her back with open arms, embracing her as their prodigal daughter. This act of unconditional love and forgiveness is pivotal for Irshad's emotional recovery, helping her overcome guilt, shame, and the trauma of her past choices. Family restoration. The reunion restores a sense of belonging and family unity, not only for Irshad but also for Aisha and her grandchildren, who are integrated into a loving, stable environment. 2. Practical and financial assistance. Providing a home. Irshad and her children move into her parents' home in a wealthy neighborhood, leaving behind the poverty and isolation she experienced after returning from Guantanamo Bay. This safe and comfortable environment is essential for the family's adjustment. Financial security. Irshad's father helps her secure employment in his import-export company, and the family ensures that Aisha and her grandchildren have the resources they need for education and daily life. Irshad also opens a bank account for Aisha and deposits a large sum to support her and her children. 3. Educational and social integration. Schooling. Irshad's parents help enroll Aisha and her grandchildren in a private Christian school, ensuring they receive quality education and begin to catch up academically after years of deprivation. Socialization. By providing a stable home and encouraging participation in church and community activities, Irshad's parents help Aisha and her children adapt to Australian society and develop a sense of normalcy and hope for the future. 4. Healing and new beginnings. Emotional healing. The loving environment provided by Irshad's parents is instrumental in helping Aisha and her grandchildren process trauma, rebuild trust, and develop healthy relationships. Role models. As committed Christians, Irshad's parents model compassion, resilience, and faith, offering a positive example for the next generation. In summary, Irshad's parents are the bedrock of the family's recovery and new life in Australia. Their forgiveness, generosity, and unwavering support enable Irshad, Aisha, and the grandchildren to heal, integrate, and begin again after years of suffering and displacement. Irshad's decision to shout from the rooftops and expose the teachings of Islam about women is a culmination of her long, traumatic journey through abuse, oppression, and survival. Several key factors drive her to become an outspoken critic and activist. 1. Personal experience of abuse and oppression. Irshad, formerly Susan Peterson, endured years of severe abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual, under the guise of religious and cultural norms. She witnessed and suffered from practices such as female genital mutilation, child marriage, forced polygamy, domestic violence, and the denial of basic rights. These experiences were justified by those around her using specific interpretations of the Quran and Hadiths. The pain and injustice she and her children suffered became the catalyst for her activism. 2. Loss and trauma. Irshad lost children to violence, kidnapping, and forced marriage. She was imprisoned, raped, and nearly executed. Her husband died in a terrorist attack, and she was separated from her children multiple times. The trauma of these losses and the realization that her suffering was not unique but shared by countless women fueled her determination to speak out. 3. Spiritual transformation and return to Christianity. After years of questioning and spiritual crisis, Irshad returned to her Christian faith. This spiritual rebirth gave her a new sense of purpose and moral clarity. She felt called to expose what she saw as the root causes of her suffering and to help others escape similar fates. 4. Desire to protect and empower other women. Irshad's maternal love and empathy extended beyond her own children. She founded an association for abused Muslim women, encouraged others to share their testimonies, and used her story to advocate for women's rights and protection. She believed that silence perpetuates abuse and that breaking the silence could save lives. 5. Rejection of political correctness and fear. Irshad explicitly rejects the idea that criticism of religious practices should be silenced by accusations of Islamophobia or hate speech. She sees her campaign as a moral duty, not just for herself but for society, to confront and reform systems that enable abuse. 6. A sense of mission and calling. Irshad comes to believe that her suffering was not in vain, but prepared her to be a voice for the voiceless. She feels called by God to expose the evil she experienced and to fight for the rights of women, using her platform, resources, and personal story to drive change. In summary, Irshad decides to shout from the rooftops and expose the teachings of Islam about women because her own journey through abuse, loss, and survival convinces her that silence enables oppression. Her transformation from victim to advocate is rooted in her personal trauma, spiritual awakening, and a deep sense of responsibility to protect and empower other women. She is determined to use her voice, story, and resources to challenge systems of abuse and to inspire change, regardless of the risks or opposition she faces. Irshad's speech at McMaster University in Canada is a powerful and controversial address in which she exposes the abuses and oppression of women based on the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Drawing directly from her own harrowing experiences in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and as a refugee. Here's a summary of the main points and tone of her speech. Key points of Irshad's speech. Condemnation of abuse against women. Irshad details the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse suffered by women under practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM, child marriage, polygamy, and domestic violence. She cites her own daughter's experiences with FGM and forced child marriage, and references the hadiths and Quranic verses used to justify these acts. Critique of religious texts. She explicitly condemns the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, calling them the main source of terrorism and the root of abuse and violence against women. She demands that these texts be banned in all Western countries, arguing that the problem of terrorism cannot be solved by military means alone, but must address the ideological sources. Personal testimony. Irshad shares her own story of suffering, being beaten, raped, and subjected to humiliating sexual practices by her husband and witnessing her children's abuse. She describes the scars on her body and the trauma endured by her family as evidence of the systemic nature of the problem. Call to action. She urges the audience and Western societies to confront and expose the sources of misogyny and violence in religious texts, rather than hiding behind political correctness or fear of being accused of hate speech. She insists that the only way to defeat Islamic terrorism and protect women is to ban the texts that justify such acts. Rejection of Islamophobia accusations. Irshad rejects the idea that her criticism is Islamophobic, arguing that fear and hatred of terrorist teachings and anti-woman practices are natural and should not be criminalized. She positions her activism as a moral duty to protect women and children. Aftermath and controversy. Her speech sparks significant controversy. Muslim students, immigrant feminists, and some Canadian professors interpret her speech as a hate crime, leading to her being banned from McMaster University and expelled by police. Despite this, she continues her campaign, believing that her message is vital for the safety and dignity of women. Tone and impact. The speech is described as fearless, direct, and emotionally charged. Irshad does not hold back in her critique, using her personal suffering as a rallying point for broader social change. Her address is both a testimony and a call to action, urging society to confront uncomfortable truths and to prioritize the rights and safety of women over cultural or religious sensitivities. In summary, Irshad's speech at McMaster University is a searing indictment of the abuse of women under the interpretations of Islam, a critique of the religious texts that justify such practices, and a passionate call for reform and protection of women's rights. The speech is controversial, leading to backlash and her expulsion from the university, but it also cements her role as a fearless advocate for abused women. The audience reaction to Irshad's speech at McMaster University was highly polarized and intense. Muslim students, immigrant Muslim feminists, and some Canadian professors interpreted her words as a hate crime. They were deeply offended by her explicit condemnation of the Quran and hadiths, her demand to ban these texts in Western countries, and her direct critique of Islamic practices regarding women. Many felt her speech was not just a critique of abuse, but an attack on their faith and identity. Protests and outrage. The backlash was immediate. There were strong protests from Muslim students and community members, and the university administration faced pressure to respond to what was seen as inflammatory and potentially dangerous speech. University response. As a result of the controversy, Irshad was banned from McMaster University and expelled by police. She was also banned from entering the premises of the university for the rest of her life. Support from others. Despite the backlash, Irshad's speech also resonated with some human rights activists, women's rights advocates, and members of the broader public who saw her as a courageous whistleblower exposing uncomfortable truths. She continued to receive invitations to speak at other venues, and her campaign gained further attention in the media. In summary, the audience at McMaster University was sharply divided. Many in the Muslim and academic community condemned her speech as hate speech and pushed for her removal, while others saw her as a brave advocate for women's rights. The controversy led to her expulsion from the university and sparked a wider debate about free speech, religious critique, and the boundaries of activism. Faculty response to Irshad's speech at McMaster University. Division and controversy. Faculty members were divided in their response. Some professors, especially those who support multiculturalism and view Islam as a religion of peace, were critical of Irshad's speech. They interpreted her rhetoric as a hate crime against pacifists and worried it might incite far-right groups to verbally attack or harm Muslim students and staff in public places, homes, schools, mosques, and workplaces. Administrative action. The university administration took the concerns seriously. As a result, Irshad was banned by the administration of McMaster University, expelled by the police in an undignified manner, and prohibited from entering the premises of the university for the rest of her life. Support and opposition. While some faculty members and students supported Irshad's right to free speech and admired her courage in exposing abuse, others saw her message as inflammatory and dangerous. The text notes that Muslim students, immigrant Muslim feminists, and some Canadian professors who support Islam and consider it a religion of peace interpreted her rhetoric as a hate crime. Broader impact. The faculty's response reflected a broader tension between academic freedom and the desire to maintain a safe, inclusive environment. The controversy over Irshad's speech became a flashpoint for debates about Islam, women's rights, and the limits of free expression on campus. In summary, faculty members at McMaster University responded to Irshad's speech with significant controversy and division. Some viewed her as a courageous advocate for women's rights, while others saw her speech as inflammatory and potentially dangerous, leading to her expulsion and a ban from the university campus. Irshad's response to her critics. Her response to her critics was one of defiance and unwavering commitment to her cause. She refused to be silenced by accusations of Islamophobia or hate speech. Instead, she positioned her activism as a moral duty to protect women and children from abuse, insisting that fear and hatred of terrorist teachings and anti-woman practices are natural and should not be criminalized. She explicitly rejected the idea that her criticism was motivated by bigotry, arguing that her campaign was rooted in her own lived experience of abuse and her desire to expose the sources of misogyny and violence in religious texts. Irshad continued her campaign even after being expelled from McMaster University, giving speeches at other venues and using her story to advocate for women's rights. She believed that silence perpetuates abuse and that breaking the silence could save lives. Her response to critics was to double down on her message, using her personal testimony as evidence and urging Western societies to confront uncomfortable truths rather than hide behind political correctness. Key points in her response. Refusal to back down. Irshad did not apologize or retract her statements. She continued to speak out publicly and in the media against what she saw as the root causes of abuse and terrorism. Moral justification. She framed her activism as a moral imperative, not as hate speech, and insisted that her critics were trying to silence necessary debate. Personal testimony. Irshad used her own suffering and the suffering of other women as the foundation for her arguments, making her case personal and urgent. Call to action. She urged others to join her in exposing and challenging the sources of misogyny and violence, regardless of the backlash. In summary, Irshad's response to her critics after her controversial speech at McMaster University was to stand firm, reject accusations of hate, and continue her advocacy for women's rights and the exposure of what she viewed as harmful religious teachings. Here's a detailed summary of the content of Irshad's, Susan Peterson's, public speeches as depicted in For the Sake of My Children. Her speeches are a pivotal part of the novel's final chapters and are delivered in various Western settings, including Canada, France, and Australia. They are described as highly controversial, emotionally charged, and deeply critical of the teachings and practices within Islam, especially regarding the treatment of women and the roots of religious extremism. Main content of Irshad's speech. 1. Condemnation of abuse against women. Irshad details the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse suffered by women under practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM, child marriage, polygamy, and domestic violence. She cites her own daughter's experiences with FGM and forced child marriage and references the hadiths and Quranic verses used to justify these acts. She shares her own story of suffering, being beaten, raped, and subjected to humiliating sexual practices by her husband and witnessing her children's abuse. She describes the scars on her body and the trauma endured by her family as evidence of the systemic nature of the problem. 2. Critique of religious texts. She explicitly condemns the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, calling them the main source of terrorism and the root of abuse and violence against women. She demands that these texts be banned in all Western countries, arguing that the problem of terrorism cannot be solved by military means alone, but must address the ideological sources. 3. Roots of terrorism. Irshad argues that the main sources of terrorism are the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. She explicitly condemned the two sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, she demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. She claims that military action alone cannot defeat terrorism because the ideology is perpetuated by religious doctrine. 4. Personal testimony. Irshad shares her own story of suffering, being beaten, raped, and subjected to humiliating sexual practices by her husband and witnessing her children's abuse. She describes the scars on her body and the trauma endured by her family as evidence of the systemic nature of the problem. 5. Call to action. She urges the audience and Western societies to confront and expose the sources of misogyny and violence in religious texts, rather than hiding behind political correctness or fear of being accused of hate speech. She insists that the only way to defeat Islamic terrorism and protect women is to ban the texts that justify such acts. 6. Rejection of Islamophobia accusations. Irshad rejects the idea that her criticism is Islamophobic, arguing that fear and hatred of terrorist teachings and anti-woman practices are natural and should not be criminalized. She positions her activism as a moral duty to protect women and children. 7. Critique of moderate versus extremist Islam. She challenges the Western narrative that terrorists are not true Muslims, arguing that the violent and misogynistic teachings are present in the core texts themselves, and that both moderates and extremists can find scriptural support for their positions. 8. On the treatment of women. She elaborates on the status of women in Islam, using controversial language. Islam treats women like animals or something lower than dumb brutes. She cites hadiths such as, "A woman is like a goat and a she-camel because everything is mounted. The dog, the donkey, and the woman invalidate the man's prayer if they pass in front of him while he is praying." She uses these examples to argue that women are reduced to sexual beings created for the pleasure of men. 9. Critique of military solutions. She argues that the problem of terrorism cannot be solved by military means alone. According to Irshad, even if Western forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. She explains that these groups are not conventional soldiers, but suicide bombers and invisible enemies who blend in with civilians and cannot be easily fought by traditional armies. 10. Call for secularization. She calls for secularization of Muslim-majority countries and for the encouragement of moderate Muslims to resist fundamentalist interpretations. Audience and aftermath. Her speeches spark significant controversy. Muslim students, immigrant feminists, and some Canadian professors interpret her speech as a hate crime, leading to her being banned from McMaster University and expelled by police. Despite this, she continues her campaign, believing that her message is vital for the safety and dignity of women. In France, her speeches lead to protests and accusations of lying and fabricating hadiths about the Prophet Muhammad. Tone and impact. The speech is described as fearless, direct, and emotionally charged. Irshad does not hold back in her critique, using her personal suffering as a rallying point for broader social change. Her address is both a testimony and a call to action, urging society to confront uncomfortable truths and to prioritize the rights and safety of women over cultural or religious sensitivities. Direct quotes from the novel. She explicitly condemned the two sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, she demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. Islam treats women like animals or something lower than dumb brutes. The only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally, unless the two main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, are banned. In the novel, the protagonist Irshad, Susan Peterson, gives several controversial speeches after escaping her years of abuse and trauma in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and as a refugee in the West. The content of her speeches and what was banned or led to her being banned from speaking at certain venues is described in detail in the document. What was banned from her speech? Irshad's speeches were banned, and she was expelled from venues, notably McMaster University in Canada, because she explicitly condemned the Quran and Hadiths. She called the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad the main source of terrorism in the world and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. She demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. Described Islam as treating women like animals. She stated, Islam treats women like animals or something lower than dumb brutes, and cited hadiths that compared women to goats and she-camels and described women as sexual objects created for men. Linked terrorism directly to Islamic texts. She argued that terrorism cannot be defeated by military means alone, but only by banning the Quran and Hadiths, which she claimed are the root cause of terrorism and misogyny. Rejected accusations of Islamophobia. She insisted that fear and hatred of terrorist teachings and anti-woman practices are natural and should not be criminalized, and that her activism is a moral duty. Called for banning Islamic texts in the West. She concluded her speeches by urging Western societies to expose and ban the sources of Islamic terrorism, namely, the Quran and Hadiths. Consequences and what was banned. Her speeches were interpreted as hate speech by Muslim students, immigrant feminists, and some Canadian professors. They argued that her rhetoric was not just a critique of abuse, but an attack on their faith and identity. She was banned from McMaster University and expelled by police. She was also banned from entering the premises of the university for life. Her speeches sparked protests and outrage among Muslim communities in Canada and France and led to her being banned from other venues as well. In summary, Irshad's speeches were banned because she directly attacked the Quran and the Hadiths, called for their prohibition in Western countries, and linked them to terrorism and the abuse of women. This was interpreted as hate speech and led to her being banned from universities and facing protests and threats.